Blank check with Griffin and David. Blank check with Griffin and David. Don't know what to say or to expect. All you need to know is that the name of the show is Blank Check.
Tell your brain to tell your arm to tell your hand to move your little podcast.
Oh, sure.
See, I'm like tearing up just like even here.
Right?
That is the best scene in the movie, maybe.
Yes, that's probably the best scene. Now, you said to me as I was getting ready to read off my butcher.
And you can talk, Bilge, and like...
You said it better be an Italian accent. Now, I love doing a Nolte impression.
Right.
I've done it too many times on this podcast.
Yeah, you have. You've done it many times, but usually you're doing Hulk or Warrior, older Nolte.
Bad dad Nick Nolte.
Right, exactly.
I'm your father, Hulk.
Right.
Right.
This is good dad, Nick Nolte.
Well,
it is. That's true.
I mean,
Great dad. Nick
he
Nolte.
really goes above and beyond.
We're going to get into this, but there's like a, chaotic, neutral, lawful, good kind of chart of just like...
Of Noltes.
Good dad, Nick Nolte, bad dad, Nick Nolte, good movie, bad dad, Nick Nolte. Like it's,
Yeah.
But this is probably...
This is like good dad, good movie, Nick Nolte.
I think this is the best good dad, Nick Nolte movie.
It's very interesting.
And it's also probably the best dad he's ever played. It's both.
I have a lot of questions about this movie, but do you know, does he look like the guy? Like, how does he get this role? Do you know anything about that? Like, I know he was obviously a big star at the time. He had recently been People's Sexiest Man Alive.
Yeah, so recently.
But like...
And he hasn't done Cape Fear yet? Or has he done
Cape Fear was the year before.
The year
Yeah.
before.
He's had a good...
Bad dad, Nick Nolte.
he got his
Right.
Oscar nom for The Prince of Tides the year before. Like,
He's at kind of peak movie stardom.
like... Here he's the burly sort of slightly older guy that moms love and
he's finally hit his ideal form in his early 50s.
His next film is I'll Do Anything.
And he's quite vulnerable.
Yes, that he's unafraid
like hulking
of.
but vulnerable.
Right.
Which is not a thing you get that often in
No,
American
I
cinema.
think
he's always had the guts to be vulnerable, I feel
in
like.
the 90s he finally hit that perfect balance, and I think it's also a thing of just the way he aged,
Right.
Like this is when he's still aging well, but how much more interesting his face becomes when there's a little more wear and tear on it.
Yeah.
When you look at him like, in the 70s when he's very young and he's kind of pretty.
Yeah, he's
beautiful.
Because he's a very angular face and, he's got a big jaw,
But he's got the Joel Edgerton thing where he's very pretty but also has this kind of like craggy mountain bone structure.
Right, it's the chin. It's in Rich Man, Poor Man, that's his big breakout.
Right.
He's got a, It's a 70s handsome.
Yes.
It's an interesting handsome.
Right, but then once he starts getting, some lines in the face, it's like incredible. And then there's like 10 years between this movie and Hulk, in which it feels like he's lived 8 lifetimes. Like he just is aging so well, and then suddenly becomes the most damaged-looking man in America.
I love him.
I
How do you
do
feel
too.
about Nolte?
I love him.
Yeah.
I believe in Rich Man, Poor Man, his character's name was Tom, right?
Let me just yes.
I remember in Turkey watching Rich Man, Poor Man as like a 6-year-old or something like that. And, it was one of the very few things that was on TV, so you just watched it.
I mean, again, hard to overstate. Like, this thing was huge. It was a huge miniseries. People,
huge.
meaning, it's like that sort of like North and South. Their roots are like back in the day when those things really were watched by everybody.
I'm sorry, I just can't get over this. You said his name is Tom. The character's name is not Richard Mann? I always assumed that was the premise of the miniseries.
Complete your anecdote.
No, that's Peter Strauss. I have no anecdote. It's just like
that was your first
it made a big
introduction.
impression.
He's one of those
I believe
actors that
he
I've
is-
kind of
he is the
known
poor
since
man.
I know myself. Yeah.
Right. He is the titular. He is the poor man of Rich Man.
He's one of my favorite dudes. I'm always happy when we crack into a Nolte. But I was watching this last night going, oh boy, David is going to expect me to do an Italian Nolte impression. And I was like staying up late
Here's
going
who
like...
sounds like this. No one in the
that's thing.
history of Earth.
And I was like trying to do the exercise of like, let me do a little Nolte. I'm like, Nolte. And I was like, let me do it in a little Italian. Pizza pie. And then I was like trying to combine them and I
it's
couldn't.
like 2 magnets. They're
Right.
just like...
Nolte, get the spaghetti. And I couldn't meld
I mean,
the two.
Geppetto kind of sounds like
Yeah,
it.
it's that's fair. It's like I knew very little going into this film. I thought of it. Its rep to me was stodgy. That it was a sort of like inspirational.
You look at the poster for this
True
film,
story.
and it looks like
I feel like it's a movie. It was like a punchline title in the '90s, like
yeah.
Lorenzo's Oil.
I mean,
like boring.
The trailer was terrible. It was called Lorenzo's Oil. And if you don't know what Lorenzo's Oil is, you're like, why the fuck would you call your movie Lorenzo's Oil?
And so that's what I knew going in. But then I flick this on, and I'm like, am I on a different audio track? Like, what's Nick Nolte's? Who's dubbing Nick Nolte right now? It's like fucking Burt Lancaster in The Leopard or something. And then I realized, like, no, he's just playing an Italian man.
A very Italian man. Now I knew, the title's got Lorenzo in it.
Sure.
I peeped the Wikipedia page before I watched the movie. I knew the character had a very Italian name, right? I don't understand that he was going to be playing an Italian man, like a man whose first language was Italian. And you watched this movie the night before I do. We're in the middle of a text thread between you and I and my brother, past and future guest, James E. Newman.
Yeah.
We're texting about the movie Warrior, which is one of my brother's favorite movies the last 10 years.
Yes.
Warrior,
and you were. How do you feel about Warrior, Bilge?
I like Warrior. I need to see it again, though.
That's good.
I love Warrior, and I have to say, rewatched it a little last night. Even better than I remember.
Just kind of to be in a Nolte zone or to get hyped for the way back? Or?
Nolte zone, Insomnia zone, way back zone. I'm all of it, right? It was a cross-triangulation kind of thing. I was watching some of it, reminded how hard that movie honks. But James and you and I were texting about Gavin O'Connor and Warrior in the anticipation of what I assume will be the blockbuster release of The Way Back. And you said, Griffin, you have to get ready for Nolte's accent.
Right,
in this
I
movie.
did spoil you on the accent. You said...
I went, Nolte accent, what's he doing? Southern? Like, I immediately thought, what accent could Nick Nolte be attempting to do, a man with that distinctive a voice, who I've never really witnessed trying to camouflage that voice in any major way.
It's true. Usually he's just doing himself.
Yeah, that's what you're paying for.
I remember Jefferson in Paris, like how he speaks in that.
Never seen that.
I've never seen Jefferson in Paris.
A good movie. I really like it. I can't remember what his voice is like in that.
But it's one of those...
He's got a great voice, though. That's
that's
it's
an
incredible voice.
I think he falls into kind of that Sean Connery camp where it's like, it doesn't matter if he's playing a Russian. He should sound like Sean Connery. Like, Nick Nolte's voice is a special effect. He doesn't need to sound like the real person. And then you say, he's playing Italian.
Yeah.
And my mind reels. And then I'm like...
And I didn't even specify Italian. Like, maybe I thought, maybe you think Italian-American. No.
No, but you said Italian.
I did say Italian.
Right. And then you went, I think it works. Like, it pretty much works.
Yeah.
And even with that, I sat there and was like, there's no way this works. And every single scene, every time he opened his mouth, I was like, God damn it, he's just making this work.
Yeah, it totally works.
It shouldn't work at all.
Because I think that accent makes the script work. And this is a very George Miller thing. I mean, you'll see it in, like Fury Road. The lines sound like they're out of Melville. I mean, they're very operatic.
Yes.
And the thing is, like...
And the whole movie's operatic, and that character in particular is the most operatic.
Like, I'm not sure that part would work if you didn't have kind of a thick accent to go with it, because it doesn't, like... In ordinary conversation, those lines don't make sense.
No.
They don't. I'm trying to imagine, like, Roberto Benigni playing this role. I'm trying to imagine, like, like a stereotypically Italian man.
What is, like, William Hurt doing this,
Sure.
Like, I'm, like, trying to think of someone who is sort of at, like, a kind of Nolte parallel at that point in the studio system in the 90s. And it doesn't work with someone who is... How do I even say this?
Pacino... I mean, Pacino kind of, claws his way back to respectability right around this time.
It's true.
Right.
Pacino could have done it.
But it is that weird thing where you're like, Pacino's getting bombastic at this point. Yeah. Nolte is that exact right balance of, like, that weird, like, aggressive masculinity and a very quiet, subtle vulnerability, where Pacino probably would have been too big and someone like Hurt would have been, like, too simmering.
Yeah.
And you need someone who can do, like, like, at times, like, Fritz Lang acting in this movie. There's, like, the scene where we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the scene where he's, like, reading all the papers of the diagnosis for the first time, and then he falls down the staircase.
I mean, that's the best scene in the movie.
I love that
not
scene
the best, but that's the scene where you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, that's the scene where you're
that's the scene where this is George Miller.
This is George Miller,
Yeah.
Right.
and this is a fucking masterpiece.
Yes.
I mean, I love this film. I love this film.
That's one reason we had you on.
We're gonna
I knew you loved this
comprehension.
film.
We're going to back up.
Yeah.
I'm going to introduce the
Yeah, you
show,
should
and then
probably-
I'm going to set this table cleanly. Because this, of course, is Blank Check with Griffin David. It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and give it a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. And sometimes those checks clear, and sometimes those checks fund a new type of oil.
Right.
And this is a mini series on the films of George Miller. It is called Mad Pod Fury Cast. And today we are talking about Lorenzo's Oil, which the IMDb trivia section states, and I think I was sort of like I had to run the calculus in my head, but both of these are correct. The only George Miller film completely devoid of fantastical elements.
Right.
It's the only film of his, even though the film is very heightened.
Sure.
It is a film that takes place entirely in our real world.
Because even your Witches of Eastwick or whatever have the sort of the supernatural.
It's got a magic.
Yes,
It's
yes.
got
And it
Satan in it.
Does-
Yeah.
Satan is there.
Yeah, witches and
And he's
the devil.
fantastical. He's not real.
Right. No, yes. No, right. Yes. Satan definitely isn't real. But also, they said this is the only film of his that is not part of a franchise, which you have to be a little
You mean
unconventional.
because Witches of Eastwick is like adapted from a book? Is that the thinking?
Yeah, you're like the book.
A book that got a sequel.
Book has a sequel. The thing's been readapted a number of times. You're like, in a
Right.
way, Witches of Eastwick as a
It
property.
is a weird sort of piece of intellectual property. You're right. You're
It's
right.
like a piece of intellectual
And
property.
plus, it's in the Updike verse. You know, if
Right.
anyone ever, if
Right,
Disney
right.
wanted to be like, all right, coming to Hulu, Updike verse,
so
baby.
that one's obviously a little bit more of a stretch, but then it's like Four Mad Maxes,
Sure,
a
the
Babes,
babes, yes.
and Two Happy Feet. This is like such an anomaly in his career.
Yeah.
And I had always, as I got more and more into George Miller over the years, like looked this up, see the poster and go, this is so strange that George Miller in the early 90s, after like a 5-year break or whatever, just inexplicably made what appears to be a sub Marvin's Room movie.
Sure.
You know, like everything about it, and even just like, oh, it got like the token Susan Sarandon Best Actress nomination. I'm sure this is one of those like 6 movies that she just got an automatic nomination
She was in the
for.
early 90s, sort of, right. Like, she would always show up.
She had like that run where it was like by the time she won,
For Dead Man Walking.
right, it was like she was Amy Adams, she was Kate Winslet, she
think-
was whoever.
Well, yeah, that was her 5th nomination. So,
Right.
yeah, Atlantic City, Thelma and Louise, Lorenzo's Oil, The Client, and then she wins for
Right.
Dead Man Walking.
So I was just like, everything about this movie feels so generic. I can't understand how this guy made this. And then at some point, I looked up the trailer. I think after we had started this podcast and knew we're probably going to talk about George Miller someday. And the trailer is not good.
Terrible trailer.
But also, the trailer cannot hide how weird the movie is. The trailer does not represent the movie well, but the trailer is almost entirely wordless, right? I mean, it's set to opera music, and it like is showing off all the crazy camera moves
Yep.
and the sort of
camera moves
frenetic energy.
rule.
Right. And the like heightened sort of exaggerated performances and everything. It doesn't make sense in context, but it became very clear to me, okay, this is a George Miller movie. This isn't him putting on some other hat. But then the thing that stuck in my mind, as we've talked about doing him over the years, as he came close twice to winning our March Madness bracket, and as we finally settled on doing him, and we were looking at the spreadsheet trying to pick guests, I went, I think Bilge tweets about this movie all the time. I had it in the back of my head. And I went, let me just do a quick search. And I looked it up, and sure enough, multiple tweets, including you, about once a year, I would say. Whether it's in an tweet, I just want to remind everyone, you have gone on the record extensively saying it is the single most underrated movie of the 90s.
Possibly of all time.
I mean, I love this.
You also once called it possibly the greatest film of the 1990s.
I mean, it's definitely a contender. The 1990s were. I mean, that was a good decade for me. There are a lot of contenders there.
You tweeted this not just last year. Here, your favorite films of the 90s: Beau Travail, Heat, Lorenzo's Oil.
Yeah.
3 great movies.
Yeah.
The Sheltering Sky, The Thin Red Line, love it.
Yeah.
I know you're a big Bertolucci guy.
Yeah.
Titanic and Underground, great 7.
That's
I mean,
a great
that's
set.
those.
And though you're sort
You
of almost
united
saying
them.
like that's the if you're looking for the Bilge Ebiri experience.
I mean,
like,
that's
yeah.
like exactly. I mean, that's like at least half of those movies could be on an all-time list for me.
Sure.
You once called it the best Christmas movie, because it's great and there's a Christmas tree in it at some point.
There is a Christmas tree in one shot.
So you essentially want to insert Lorenzo's Oil into the conversation of best blank of all time. The most blank.
It is definitely a most movie. It's also, I think...
Would it be like your Sight and Sound 10? You know, if you were doing one of those?
I don't know.
That's tougher.
Yeah.
I mean that's...
You know, there are, I mean, there, you know.
Basically, your take is like, I love this movie more than anyone I've ever met. Like, I may be actually the biggest Lorenzo's Oil fan.
I was like, I think it's Bilge, but I know there is someone who has clearly carved out a corner for themselves as the world's biggest Lorenzo's Oil fan.
Well, part of it is also because it's so undervalued.
Yeah.
And part of it is, and it's undervalued in part because of all the things that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, it was not marketed well. It doesn't seem...
It wasn't a very big...
And also, also, if you know what it's about, you're like, oh, I don't want to see that at all. Like, it doesn't...
No, it seems like it'll be sort of grueling and challenging. And
I know a lot of people who haven't seen it who love George Miller, and I'm kind of like, just like, see this movie. It's really good. And it's also really personal.
Yeah. You know? Yes. I mean,
well, right. That's the thing is that as I'm watching it, I remember like, oh, right. He's a doctor.
I mean, there were two things that immediately hit me once I started watching this movie. In this genre that is very unappealing to me of sort of a medical issue, you know, like weepy on its face, right? The worst example of which, or the most generic example of which is like Harrison Ford Extraordinary Measures, right?
Right.
It's like, I'm gonna find this cure. And I'm like, don't want to watch this movie. Seems punishing and also kind of maudlin and generic. So for me to want to watch a film like this where you know even in its best execution it is going to be so fucking painful and grueling to live through this process, I have to know that it's so fucking good, right? So I even though I was sold on the idea of I'm probably going to like this movie, I go into it a little bit guarded. And then the first two things I recognize almost immediately because we're watching all these movies in order and we're like living in this Miller headspace is, oh, right, this guy actually has a medical degree, worked as a doctor. This immediately feels different than any other time I've seen this movie because of how much more intimately this guy understands all the different dynamics at play.
It's very
and the actual fucking science at play.
But also very good at dramatizing like the very alienating experience of talking to a doctor who's trying to explain to you like why your son's brain is melting.
And also understanding both sides of that death.
Yes, 100%.
Right,
absolutely.
being the person supporting the patient, being the doctor. I mean, it's got such a nuanced, complicated understanding of that entire landscape. But the other thing is, oh, right, this is the movie he makes 2 films after he makes his movie where his best friend and closest collaborator dies.
Right.
And he constantly talks about that being an enormous grief in his life. Like a really, really long, drawn-out grieving process. And you know, he's not reticent to talk about Byron Kennedy, but it always feels like it's tinged with this, like, I wish I could have prevented that, even though there's nothing he could have done.
Yeah.
And that desire in this movie feels very personal and palpable to him.
Yeah, I mean, he understands the medicine, but he also understands grief and the helplessness that comes with kind of the other side. And I just love, I mean, the fact that the film is so bold in its style and kind of its affect, and yet is also extremely compassionate. Even though, I mean, I think the real doctors that were portrayed in the film, you know, under pseudonyms.
The guy that Ustinov is based on was furious. I think he called it scurrilous
because he feels like Ustinov becomes too much of like an impediment in the later part of the movie. Was that his?
Well, maybe
issue?
Look it up, David.
I tried to and I couldn't find anything particular.
I think I don't think that character is a one-to-one kind of representation.
Which is why I think they changed the name. I think he did it out of a sense of my presumption is that he changed the name not because it's a composite as much as because he is using this character to dramatic ends and he doesn't want to.
Yeah,
right. He thinks that it's too negative. That he's like, I was not as like sort of obstinate or whatever as that movie is. But I don't think Ustinov's character really is that obstinate.
He's not either. He's actually I find him very compassionate and very touching.
If you're the real person, you might.
Right. But that's why he changed the name.
Yeah, he changed the name, and also like he's dramatizing stuff. So in many cases, I mean, there has to be some, oppositional figures and things like that.
Right.
And there's also this whole, I mean, meta narrative isn't quite the right word, but there is this this idea that in some ways what we're also watching is related to some extent to the AIDS crisis, right? And which is referenced like once in the movie.
Yeah.
But this is coming
at the time. People were very much aware that like that is kind of a sub narrative happening here.
Yeah.
So in that sense, this is a very symbolic character, and the fact that he can do so much with that character and still make me feel bad for the guy.
I think it's a really, really skillful performance.
I would love to be played by Peter Ustinov. That would be fucking great.
Have you guys seen those videos? I don't know what the origin is. It must be from some like old BBC special or something. It doesn't even look that old because it's him at an older age. I mean, I think it's him in the 90s. Where he like is telling old showbiz stories and he does impressions of all the actors he used to work with. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen these?
No.
I for whatever reason will stumble upon them on YouTube every once in a while through that tricky algorithm, and then we'll end up down a rabbit hole. But he'll be like telling stories about working with Charles Laughton. I mean, he's just sort of like dishing goss on that whole generation of actors, and he does the most insane impressions of everyone, including a Jim Carrey level of his face transforms when he does the person.
I wonder if he ever did Nick Nolte and Lorenzo.
I mean, it makes me wonder. Because Peter Ustinov does not look like Charles Laughton.
Yeah.
And he'll tell a story about being on set with Charles Laughton, and he'll be like, and then Laughton said, and then his face just turns into Charles Laughton. It looks like those dumb deepfake videos that now circulate.
Yes.
Where a comedian is doing an impression of a
Fakes.
person.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Ustinov rules. It's an
Great
awesome
guy.
person to have play you. And I think he's playing this character very responsibly, understanding that it is not a villain.
Yeah.
Even though he is a dramatic obstruction for much of the film.
Man, he didn't die for another 12 years after this. Peter Ustinov really stuck around.
But did he work much after this film?
That's a good question.
The second he came on screen, it made me realize I don't think I've ever seen Ustinov at this
did
age.
Stuff.
In a movie.
I mean, I think he took little roles,
Okay.
His last, on-screen role is the Joseph Fiennes Luther biopic. Don't forget.
Oh, right.
Don't forget Luther.
Bilge Ebiri from Vulture. The last two times you've been on this show, first of all, welcome to the Three Timers Club.
Hello.
But the last two times you've been on this show were for Christopher Nolan and Michael Mann, who are very loudly two of your favorite filmmakers and people you've written about extensively and thought about deeply. And then this movie you vouch for very hard.
Right. Are you a big Miller guy?
Is Miller a big guy for you in general, or is it really this film that stands head and shoulders above the rest of the filmography?
Oh, I mean, I love Miller, but this is the movie that made me fall in love with George Miller.
Sure.
At the time that I saw,
this. You saw this when you were in college.
I saw this when I was in college, and I saw it out of a sense of duty. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I want to go see Lorenzo's Oil. I had a friend and I had started an arts and culture magazine, and I was, I had appointed myself film critic.
Congratulations!
And it was coming out. This was coming out, and we had some invites to press screenings, but not for this one, if I remember correctly. So I went out by myself on a, one weekend, afternoon or evening to the local multiplex and sat in the theater where I think I was the only other person. I think it was maybe two people.
Yeah,
this was not a hit. This film.
Not a hit.
No.
Yeah, and it was opening weekend. And kind of was just I guess I have to fucking see Lorenzo's Oil because that's one of the movies opening.
Right.
So I went and saw it. And
with the sense of 9 to 5 grind, got to
right.
clock in at
Broccoli
Lorenzo's
movie,
Oil.
right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I had seen Mad Max as a kid, but it hadn't the first Mad Max, and it hadn't made that much of an impression on me. I think I enjoyed it, but I didn't really even make the connection.
Sure.
Because at the time, there was another George Miller. There's also this. Do you remember this? The Man from Snowy River, George Miller, also Australian.
Huh.
Frozen Assets, George Miller.
Whoa.
It's just funny because for a long time, we actually thought they were the same guy.
Sure.
Right, of course. Why not? They seem like they're making the same kinds of movies.
Yeah.
No, yeah, of course. He made Andre, the movie with the seal.
Yeah.
I saw Andre. Remember Andre?
And he has no like middle initial. He is just George Miller.
It's so funny to think that they were like, okay,
And then he
kids have been
died.
friends
That
with like
George Miller died.
chimpanzees. Yeah, he did die. He had the no initials. But they were just like, I don't know, what could a kid be friends with? They're just like walking around a zoo and someone sees a seal. I'm like, sure, let's do a seal.
90s had a ton of
She's gonna have to be on a dock the whole time.
a kid and an animal,
in
Monkey
a
trouble.
small town, and the kid's either on vacation or it's a single parent or something.
light hijinks, very light sort of velvet glove hijinks.
And then you save the community center and like, woof, great.
You know which one of those movies? We'll get back to Lorenzo's Oil in a moment, and then talk about it for the rest of this episode. But one of those movies where I'm just like, what a weird series of things that culturally led up to this being a project that was greenlit. The live-action mid-90s Flipper movie starring Elijah Wood and Paul Hogan.
Right. It's true. Which my grandmother took me to see in the theater. I remember very clearly. She was like, this is the movie for a grandma and her grandson.
Here's this weird guy who suddenly became like an overnight pop culture phenomenon.
You're talking about Paul Hogan.
Yeah, these two massive hit films. Then like no one really knew what to do with him afterwards, including himself. And most of his projects are self-started, and that's
it's
one
like
of the,
you should play a salty guy, right? Like,
But
you're
like,
gonna wear a Hawaiian shirt and drive a boat? Paul Hogan, call him up.
That's like the very tail end of his studio run, where he's like, I don't know, just put me in a Flipper movie. Like, I'm not gonna write a script for myself. Put me in a goddamn Flipper movie. Elijah Wood is just at the precipice of graduating to like
puberty,
right?
Yeah,
like he's sort of on the precipice
North.
of being like post-child star.
Yeah,
and then it's that era where they're just like, oh. Any 60s television show still airs on repeats enough that it has name recognition with 5-year-olds.
Right.
Like, it's insane. Why would I have known what Flipper was?
I don't know. I don't know why. Well, you knew because you knew from Dolphins.
I knew from
I
Dolphins.
don't know. I had certainly never seen Flipper.
Flipper was on TV pretty regularly when I was a kid. I'm a little older than you guys, but like it was like you came home, and at 3 p.m. or 3:30 p.m. like that was on TV along with the old Batman.
Yes,
yeah, old Batman.
I fully remember Flipper.
Andy Griffith.
Yes, I remember Flipper
Yeah.
rerunning alongside all those shows, usually at after school times, and it was constantly the show that I just clicked past on the remote.
Who's the villain in the Flipper movie though?
Who's the actor?
Yeah. I mean, apart from, like, I assume society is a villain in
Jürgen
Flipper.
Prochnow. I'm going to guess Jürgen Prochnow.
It's a strong guess, but no.
The only thing I remember strongly about Flipper is Paul Hogan forces Elijah Wood to smoke an entire cigar. And then Elijah Wood vomits in a bucket. Yeah, so when you say villain, that's what immediately comes to mind. A deeply traumatizing thing.
Jonathan Banks plays the villain in Flipper, which is it just sounds good. I saw that movie. I have no memory of Jonathan Banks.
That rules.
But,
And Kiarostami directed that? Who directed the Flipper movie?
Yeah, that was a Kiarostami. A guy called Alan Shapiro directed it.
Wow.
Who sounds like, I don't know, someone who takes your name as you enter your agent's office or something.
Sure.
I don't know.
David.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. Have a lot of free time on my hands these days.
Yeah, I get you.
To consume media.
Love media. It's really all we got right now.
It's all we got. It's the only thing we really got going for us as a society right now. And if you are listening to this show, you're probably a podcast fan. You're probably something of a hardcore podcast listener if you're still listening to our 2 hours of nonsense every single week, which means you might be looking for even more podcasts to fill up your time. And this is a very exciting new podcast I want to talk about today. Bananas for Bonanza.
Oh, yes. I know this one because it's the one that features Dalton Wilcox, who's made many an appearance.
Of the West, cowboy poet from Comedy Bang Bang.
One of my favorite people to ever be on Comedy Bang Bang. He's been on Comedy Bang Bang. He's been on the Anti-Daily Podcast Pilot Project.
He seems to have a very close relationship with Andy Daly.
Yeah, who's a great guy, and I love Andy Daly.
A very funny comedian, a star of Review, for my money, one of the best comedy series of the last decade.
I agree.
Now, you hear the pitch for this show, and you go, oh, it's just another one of these podcasts where someone watches every episode of an old TV show.
Sure.
But the X factor here is, it's Dalton Wilcox. This guy's a little bit of a wild card. He's, dare I say it, a real character.
He is a bit of a character.
If you catch my drift. Winky, winky.
Yes. and he's being joined every other week, I'm sorry, by his friends Mutt Taylor and Amy Sleeverson, who are closely associated with Matt Gorley and Maria Bamford.
Good friends with those two people, respectively.
Right. And they're going to take on watching Bonanza, which ran for 14 years and 430 episodes. It was one episode at a time.
One of the longest running TV shows of all time. One of the longest running scripted TV shows of all time. This is quite a commitment to throw down the gauntlet and announce that you're going to cover every single episode of Bonanza. So this is an exciting thing to get on the ground floor of.
Right. They got their work cut out for them, but exactly. On off weeks, you can catch bonus episodes with Dalton and Mutt only on Stitcher Premium.
Oh, this is nice. This show already has 2 different feeds.
Just grab your wooden stake in case of vampires, because that's something Dalton is on the lookout for. I don't know if you know that.
Of course. A big part of his mythology.
You can catch Bananas for Bonanzas. That's bananas, spelled with an O.
B-O-N-A-N-A-S.
It's on Earwolf beginning April 27th on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
And look, we all need ways to fill our time right now, so why not fill it with a commitment to 430 episodes main feed of Bananas for Bonanzas?
It is actually great. I got to listen to that thing.
So you think George Miller might be the same guy who directed Andre?
Right, as you're walking into oil, right? Yeah. You're like, I don't know, he made Mad Max, he made Andre.
Andre the Champagne of Flippers.
Yeah, there's no sense in my head, this is like,
an auteur.
This is an auteur I need to pay attention to. And I hadn't seen Road Warrior at the time. And
that's funny. That had just passed you by.
That is just. I mean, I remember opening and being a thing, and I just hadn't seen it.
And you hadn't seen Thunderdome, and you hadn't seen Witches of Eastwick, which was a pretty big hit.
I had seen Witches of Eastwick.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But it wasn't a movie I particularly cared for.
And it's a guy whose career at this point is 3 films, all in the same franchise.
3 Australian car exploitation movies.
Yeah. Which for me, growing up, I was like, I watched parts of these movies on TV all the time, and it wasn't until years later that I sat down and distinctly interpreted them as separate things. Mad Max just sort of felt like a mash of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then Witches of Eastwick, which you're like, oh, that's like an above average studio comedy. That's like a good studio comedy. But it doesn't feel like that guy is defining himself
also
as
that was a very star-driven movie.
Yeah.
Nicholson and Cher and Michelle, it's
Susan Sarandon.
Susan Sarandon again, You don't think of that as a Miller movie so much.
Yeah. So you sit down ready for your plate of broccoli. You have no strong feelings on Miller either way.
Right. And the movie starts. And, I mean...
Universal logo.
Yeah, Universal logo. The opening scenes in the Camaros where you're kind of like, what is happening? But
actually the opening is kind of amazing.
It's it's Friedkin-esque in kind of like, I am going to start this movie in a place where you have no anticipation.
Right. You don't think this is going to be in the movie, and it's not going to be terribly relevant to the movie, but it's very crucial to the sort of soul of this character, especially the Nick Nolte.
But I was certainly dreading when you get to that opening, you go, oh God, is he going to catch an illness from the fact that he and his family were in?
Sure. Uh-huh.
Right. So I'm sitting there clenched, from that opening, as beautiful and well done as I think it is. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh God, is that the narrative of this thing?
Right. And then, but fairly quickly, I become aware that I'm watching something that is nothing like what I anticipated.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing why I'm always so kind of militant about this movie, because it really is just this high operatic sense of style in it is there from frame one.
Yeah.
It does not stop. It stops at one point, but very pointedly stops. But it really just never lets up.
Yes.
And that sense of style, suddenly I was completely just overwhelmed by this thing. And it was, it's still to this day one of the greatest, movie-going experiences I've ever had. And after I saw it, I was just like, oh my God, what the fuck was that? And of course I immediately went and rented Road Warrior and stuff. And watching Road Warrior, I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of the same aesthetic. This is very much his imprint. And at the time, I think in my review at the time, I said something like, Mad Max is that Lorenzo's Oil is basically the Road Warrior aesthetic enters the real world.
There are camera movements in this movie that reminded me of Fury Road. This is him.
Right, yeah.
And of, prior films, obviously. But, just that, thing in the library where it's God is, coming down to look on this woman, essentially.
You cannot beat it out of this guy.
Yeah.
You know?
No, and not only
you get the sense that he fundamentally could not make an anonymous film as hard as he tried.
Sure.
Like, I think this movie is actually more stylized than any of his other movies, too. Except maybe Fury Road.
Fury Road, maybe just because it has all on top of its the Fury how with the Mad Max stuff. It's got the speed ramping and the colors.
I also want to remind the panel that Babe was a pig in a city, populated.
But that's the thing.
By little animals who wear little clothes.
The thing is that Babe is a great movie about a talking pig.
Yes,
and you're like, I mean, this is pretty out there, and it worked.
Right.
And then
Got
he's
it,
like,
template
you
set.
don't even know how fucking out there this pig can be. I'm gonna take him to the city, and you're gonna cry and scream.
Yeah, you want a chimpanzee wearing a three-piece?
I want children to never want to go to a movie theater again.
Right. Animals somehow paying rent in a flop house. I mean, we'll get to this, but it's just so crazy the leap that Babe Pig in the City makes where it's Babe won. Here are animals.
What if a pig wanted to be a sheepdog? You're like, insane.
We all play that mind game. What if the animals are talking to each other and we can't hear it? But they move like animals and they're not doing people things. And then Babe 2 is like, no, they have a little city. They have a little city where animals rule.
So strange.
They got a little animal city.
Have you ever met Miller? Have you ever interacted with him? Because I feel like with Nolan and Mann, you know, we discussed both times you've interacted with those.
No,
people.
I've never interacted with Nolan.
Oh no, you never did like a Q&A with him?
No, I've never done a Q&A with him.
You should do a Q&A with him. Come on, Tenet's coming up this year.
Do a Q&A.
I'm going to send Warner Brothers an email.
I have tried to.
I know.
Well, at the Village Voice, I came very close.
He just doesn't do a lot.
It is my understanding that Christopher Nolan hates New York Magazine because David Edelstein hates his movies.
Wow.
But
he feels like someone who reads The Atlantic. It just feels like in that kind of like calm middle, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't know who I am, but maybe The Atlantic will catch his eye.
What if Christopher Nolan's a blankie and this episode drops and all three of us get like a DM, a group
hello,
DM?
Mate. Yeah. I'd love to be on the podcast. You guys, who won March Madness?
Yeah.
It's
too bad Tom Green lost. I would have done Freddy Got Fingered.
But you've never talked to Miller.
I've never talked to Miller. I was supposed to interview him right before Fury Road came out, and then the interview got canceled.
Sure.
So, and it's not like he makes that many movies, so it's not like there are a ton of
That's
opportunities
the thing
to talk
about
to him.
almost every project he's picked, including this one. You know, this, like you said, it's a 5 years after Witches of Eastwick. You're like, why was this the film he zeroed in on of all, you know, for his fifth film and his second non-Mad Max movie?
Well, right. To contextualize this a little bit, 3 Mad Maxes, which are just this thing that grows and grows, right? This like sort of master he has to serve, and I think serves with pleasure.
Wow.
But the third film is then tainted by the grief and the loss of Byron Kennedy. Then his first film he makes fully on his own is the only film that he really made properly within the American studio system, and also as just like a director being hired rather than someone who is fully developing the thing out of his heart and his mind.
I think it's the only movie he didn't write, right? I can't remember if he wrote The Happy Feast. No, he did.
He did.
So
Everything
I
else
think
is so fully his
Eastwick
blood.
is the only one he's not credited as a screenwriter.
And he talked extensively, and I'm sure we talked about this on the episode, that Eastwick was a very difficult process for him. The first time he was dealing with like notes, you know, and studio pressures, and that Nicholson insulated him from it a lot and sort of taught him to stand up for himself. But he had weirdly like developed this kind of like, you know, Miyazaki of Australia sort of career where he just like got to do everything exactly the way he wanted it, you know, because he raised the money himself. He had the same collaborators. He had a sort of workflow and everything. And that was the first time that he was having to like serve other people. And then he doesn't make a movie for 5 years. And he comes back with this, which does feel like a sort of time-delayed processing of the sort of everything he was going through during Beyond Thunderdome and Witches of Eastwick. Then with some time to rest, I think he gets divorced in between these two movies also. Is that possible? I think he gets divorced between Eastwick and Lorenzo.
I can't remember, but he married Margaret Sixel, who he's married to now, in 95. So it sounds about right.
Yeah.
Which is, you know. Lorenzo's Oil. So you see Lorenzo's Oil in 1992. You have a profound experience with it. How many times have you seen this movie, would you say?
I've seen it many times.
Many
I've seen
times.
it more than 20, I would say.
That is a lot of times.
Yeah.
I don't mean that judgmentally. It's just very interesting to me.
I mean, it was in theaters for like, 3 weeks or something.
Right.
So
it was brief. It was in and out.
Yeah, but I bought the Laserdisc
Wow.
And I watched it. And I also
Did you have to flip that sucker?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
135 minutes. That's
Must have been flipping like Paul Hogan, smoking a
But
stogie.
I will say, while we were talking, I looked up if you can buy a flipper laser disc because I was you gotta flip
sure,
those.
sure.
$5.
Wow.
If you wanted.
Commentary?
I have one still. I think I have the laser disc for this still. I mean, I also have the DVD.
Yeah.
But this is also one of those movies that I
think
would
it doesn't
show
have a
to
Blu-ray.
people.
It just was announced.
Oh, just
Kino
announced.
Lorber
Oh,
is
good.
just announced one that I
for
think
them.
will hopefully be coming out around the time this episode airs.
That's cool.
Soon.
For them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I mean, this is one of those movies that I would show people.
Yeah.
Like if you were my girlfriend, you would
Sure.
have to watch this movie. Like,
Right.
and I showed it to my roommates, and I mean, it's
And would people always walk away after that being like, "You're right, this is an underrated movie," or were some people like, "Why did you show me that?" Like, because when I watched this film, was surprised by how much I liked it, but
Yeah.
I had very low expectations, or not very low, but like.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I've ever had someone say, "Why did you show me that?"
Sure.
But
been a little
maybe they were
rude.
afraid. But
right.
no, I mean, not everyone has loved it.
Sure.
But a lot of people have loved it, or at least so they told me.
Sure.
But
It's a special movie.
but yeah, I mean, it's a very moving film too. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily
Yeah,
have
it's
to
hard to be
appreciate
mad
the
at it,
aesthetics
right.
to. A lot of people have problems with Nolte's accent and whatnot, but it's
I can't be mad
it
at
works.
his accent.
I can't either.
It's
It
works.
It's too unusual for me to be mad at.
It's also the other thing, and I should note this. And I didn't know this at the time. I mean, it's only after I saw the movie that I realized this, or as I saw the movie, I realized the story. My father worked for the World Bank.
Interesting.
So when I saw that like this was a World Bank family, like there are certain things about World Bank families. Not that I knew that many of them, but we know a lot of Turkish World Bank families and a couple of others. But there was something about the way it depicted that family that felt very authentic to me.
Yeah.
I love good Washington D.C. movies.
Sure.
Yep.
And I think of this as one, even though it's not really like
Yeah, but it's a good movie about like being confronted with an insurmountable problem and sort of charging into it and charging into bureaucracy and right. Like I get the Washington D.C. vibe.
Which, aside from the fact that he is a doctor, I know it is the easiest thing in the world and an overly tempting thing to do to track the character struggle in any movie onto the director expressing something about how hard it is to make a movie. But it does feel like there's something in the sort of single-mindedness of I need to solve this seemingly impossible problem, and the type of mentality that gives you the persistence and the stubbornness and the mix of realism but also optimism to keep going through it. And to have that also be someone who has been both a filmmaker and a practicing doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, there's also a certain arrogance to these characters. I mean,
Yes.
the guy, they even say this in the movie. It's
Yeah.
a whole thing. And he doesn't shy away from that.
Right.
Like they are allowed to be they're persistent, but they're allowed to be a little annoying in their persistence as well. And I love that. And I love the fact that
It's part of
Right.
why they succeeded at
right.
this.
And the way that Susan Sarandon's character, kind of becomes almost monstrous at a certain
Yeah.
point. I'm almost shot like a horror movie character where she's kind of like lurking in the background or she's like a shadow or we see the back of her head. Even as we understand why she's doing the things that she's doing and even as we feel great compassion for her, the film also is willing to acknowledge the sense that she's becoming this like kind of monstrous figure.
Well, and the mapping is easy because making films is something that all filmmakers innately have experience with. So you can watch any movie knowing that they can always relate whatever's happening in the film to going through that.
Yeah.
But that's
Keeping your eye on the goal.
right.
At the risk of offending, alienating all sorts of people.
Which by the nature of this podcast and the types of films and directors we cover, we're constantly coming up against those anecdotes where it's like, everyone said you can't do this thing. Or the stories of how someone tricked someone into doing the thing they wanted them to do.
Right.
Or you act like an asshole and hardball on this thing so that they ultimately come around. Like that sort of bullheadedness all in the name of some single-minded end purpose, I think what is interesting is that in the same way that he portrays the Ustinov doctor as inherently a well-intentioned, moral man who is beholden to...
Well, he's like, I want to help you in any way I can. I have ideas, but when they're like, how do we just like crash through the system? He has to be like, well, I still represent, a methodology that I can't like go around.
And it is this thing that I genuinely just don't think about much because we are so frequently talking about how completely fucked our healthcare system is. And it's very easy to just think of the binary of like, we should all get treatment and it shouldn't cost us all literally an arm and a leg, that you don't think about the intricacies of the double-edged sword of bureaucracy needing to coexist with medical science because of what is at stake in every single instance. And that you are essentially, if you are working in the medical field, you're working in a field where mistakes are truly fatal, where the stakes are so high in terms of what can go wrong that you understand the sort of trepidatiousness and the sort of like the instinct to follow the line and not veer off, because it's like, how are you going to defend the choice to do something that hasn't been thoroughly tested and approved if that goes wrong, versus if you follow the book and the person dies and you're able to say, well, it's a horrible disease. We couldn't have done anything about it. But it's like, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. And you see that depicted even in like the nurses.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's another thing I love about this movie, and I think why someone like Miller was ideal for it. You'll see, these weird scenes or shots where you see, a nurse talking to the O'Dones or to Lorenzo, and they walk away, and then you see her face and her expression just changes. It's not like it's almost like a horror movie thing, but it's not.
Yeah.
Her expression just changes to completely neutral, almost robotic. And you realize this is part of their job. This is this person's job. And I mean, you'll see it with the nurses that come to their house where, like, this is how we do things. You have to do it this way. I can't be a party to this. And even as they want to help, and even it's not like they don't care, but there is a certain amount of self-preservation, professionalism, all these things that come into it. And I think, Miller, as someone who was a doctor, probably saw this and understood this on some level with the doctors as well. I'm sure it's something, he worked in an emergency room, right? Isn't that how like Mad Max came about?
Yeah, he would like drive an ambulance around to do like DIY surgeries on people.
But it is, I'm gonna mangle it here, but Ustinov has that line at one point where he's like, your job is to be parents, and my job is to not.
Yeah.
Like, my job is to see this from the objective point of view and not get clouded by emotions, because that's my responsibility. You are not going to be able to extricate your emotions from this situation, and that onus is on me. And they can view that as, oh, you're disconnected, you're at arm's length, you're not understanding the stakes of this.
Yeah.
And he's like, if I was getting as upset about this as you were, I wouldn't be able to do my job.
Yeah.
But then also, this movie is not clinical at all. It feels like a fucking opera, and like he'll stage a conference with a doctor in like Charlie Rose, like black room, and things like that.
It is as operatic as any movie I have ever seen.
And it's using Barbara's Adagio just for strings. And Platoon had just come out like 6 years earlier, so it's kind of like a almost hacky piece of music in a way to use, but it works.
And it's repeating it 8,000
very
times.
referential in that way. I mean, this is also George Miller's like movie love movie.
Yeah, sure.
Because the scene where they talk about the night of the shooting stars, La Notte di San Lorenzo. He's using Verdi's Requiem, which is the music that's used in the Taviani Brothers' Night of the Shooting Stars. Very memorable.
Sure.
Like, this is a movie that is, referential in that way. And that's another thing that, this is 92?
92.
Yeah. 92.
An incredible movie year.
Yeah, incredible movie year. But like 92, there was this period in the, early 90s, and maybe even starting in the late 80s, where we get these kind of highly referential, highly stylized auteur films. I mean, Cape Fear, Age of Innocence, Bram Stoker's Dracula, this one, very much so.
You have all these guys like De Palma and Coppola and Scorsese making quote unquote like studio tentpole movies.
Making sort of pulpy movies.
Yeah.
Right. Like signing on to pre-existing IP. And then you get also, things like The Untouchables carriage sequence.
But they're filled with like lap dissolves and all this stuff. And a lot of it, I think, comes from in the 1980s, you know, there was this kind of run of great like restorations of silent films, right? In part because of the video revolution, but like, you know, I think Napoleon is restored in 81 or, you know, released in 81. I think Sunrise is restored at the end of the decade. I mean, but like there's this period of reconnecting with movie history, and suddenly you start to see these movies. I don't know that any of them like has directly referenced like why they did this, but you really sense this, you know, reconnection and the return of this like a very lush stylization that feels like, I think around this time there's also a restoration or not re-release of Magnificent Ambersons. You feel like you're watching like, you know, if Orson Welles had continued to make movies.
Coppola does his Napoleon reconstruction. Right. I mean, I think part of that is, I hadn't thought about this, but it is like that's the period of time, the late 80s, early 90s, where suddenly the movie brats are becoming the establishment.
Right.
Like if not the old guard, they're becoming the guys who are at the absolute peak of the mountain. And unlike, you know, Spielberg, who had just sort of pretty much started at the top as someone who was really successful at being populist and in touch with the culture, the other guys had to fight to sort of get to the point where they were able to get access to those major budgets, big stars, name IP, whether it's a remake or it's a book or it's a adaptation of a TV show or whatever the fuck it is. You know, Coppola had sort of gotten to that point accidentally and then lost it hard and is now being given the keys to the kingdom again. Like all these guys are getting to do these things, and that's the first major wave of filmmakers who are like the product of serious film school.
Yes, it's real film school kids. That's what I was thinking about too.
They're coming up at the time.
You also have Malcolm X this year, which is like Spike Lee's big first magnum opus-y kind of movie, right? You have Unforgiven, obviously, which is more swan-songy, although then Clint would make 20 more movies.
Dedicated to Sergio and Don. Like that's 100%. That's his referential movie. And
you have Altman coming back and making a big fucking movie in The Player rather than like his weird 80s output.
Which is also his, I mean, his version of movie love is like, get a load of these fucking assholes who work in Hollywood.
100%. And then you also have like the dawn of Tarantino is this year, the dawn of Miramax with The Crying Game. And the dawn of like, well, I guess it's not the dawn of like this sort of 90s sexy thriller, but like Basic Instinct is this year, which is sort of maybe the peak of the, like really hard R sort of.
Well, they kind of come back with Basic Instinct because before there was like.
The 80s had that.
They had Body Heat, they had all those, but then, you know.
Basic Instinct is like more vulgar. Like Body Heat is fucking Disney compared to this shit. We can go further, guys.
But I think, I mean, I saw Scorsese speak at the New York Film Festival a couple of years ago, because he'll like every year pretty much I think almost every year he'll screen a restoration that he had helped supervise and do a little talk back after it. And he did this Q&A. I forget who moderated it, but they actually asked him one question that took up the entire 45 to hour-long Q&A. It was the best Q&A
it must have been
I have ever seen.
Or whatever.
I think it was. It was perfect, but it was just literally, so you've done a lot for preservation and for film history. How did you get started with all of this? And it was one perfect 50-minute.
But that question is designed.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, let's just talk about it.
How did you get started with film history to Martin Scorsese?
You know,
maybe there all day.
Maybe I'm smoothing it over.
Picture my mother slaving over the stove, and I'm like, all right, baby, we're on Mulberry Street.
Unbuckle your belts, you know, take your shoes off.
Maybe I'm rewriting this in my mind, but I literally don't even remember the other person interjecting with like, can you elaborate on that? I just remember the other person sitting back with like their arms crossed and letting him go. But he was talking about sort of the baby steps that led to him starting, what's it called, the Film Foundation, and all of his sort of preservation and such. And he talks about when all those guys started to like break into the studio system and have access to the lot because they were all like these film school kids who were hyper literate, hyper obsessive with everything, in a certain way were, I think, influenced by what the whole Cahiers de Cinema gang looked like to them.
Sure, they wanted to be a new
Right. Here are these like 8 people who all just sit around all day watching movies like nonstop and talking about them extensively. We want to promote that same sort of like excitement and cultural literacy about the history of film in America, in California. When they got access to all these backlots, they'd go like, oh my God, we can just go in there. They have prints of everything and we can watch them. We can just take a print and we can go into a screening room and we can just stay there and watch whatever we want. And Scorsese said as they started getting these prints and screening them, all of them were horrible.
Right.
Like they were like orange and they were melting. Right. And it started with them being like, we have to complain to them, which they, of course, were like, who fucking cares? And I think it became like a real cause for them as like the more successful they got, the more responsibility they felt to continue that cycle, which then perpetuated itself onto the bigger their opportunities became as filmmakers, the more their films had to promote a sort of sense of, if I like this movie, I want to step away and research what this is referencing. David?
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
You don't.
I actually know nothing about you.
No, you know a couple things.
I mean, well, what? I know you grew up in New York City and lived your entire life there. Have never left.
Let's just move it along. What else don't you know about me?
This is a thing I don't know about you in the present tense, but I can only speak for myself here. My bed sheets are getting a real workout these days. Now, in other circumstances, that might sound like a humble brag, implying that there's some sexual activity going on there. My friends, nothing could be further from the truth. What I mean is I'm spending an exorbitant amount of time in bed while stuck at home in self-quarantine.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you that basically, you know how you usually spend like a third of your life in your sheets? I think that's nudging up to more like half.
I agree. It's about 50-50 these days. It's 50% the couch, 50% the bed sheets. Now, I would love to get a couch sponsor on this podcast, but for the time being, we have maybe the best bedding sponsor in the game, Brooklinen, who have been with us for so long. We have always been very outspoken how much we love this product. Very, very sincerely. Don't want to imply that we don't love all of our advertisers, but let's just say we really love Brooklinen.
I love Brooklinen, and in this time of home, the home times that we live in right now, I would say Brooklinen is with me basically 24 hours a day, like if I'm in bed, or perhaps in some loungewear, perhaps in a bathrobe.
That's what I was going to say.
That's all like, Brooklinen, baby.
They're covering all the creature comforts you kind of need at home right now. Yes. We're talking towels, we're talking bathrobes, we're talking sweatpants, we're talking sheets. This stuff is super important right now.
Look, listen. They help you find the comfort in the little things, okay? Mm-hmm. So they've got extra soft sheets. They got plush towels. If you're working from home, it helps you stay comfortable while you're staying productive. And it helps you get a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a bedroom oasis right now, my Brooklinen bed.
I would argue that this ad copy is actually no longer to date because saying take comfort in the little things is now really underselling how important Brooklinen products are on an hour-by-hour basis.
So, listen up. If you like softness and comfort and essentials to help you relax, Brooklinen has it all. Brooklinen.com is the perfect place to find all the comforts for home, and they're so confident in their products that all their sheets, comforter, loungewares, and towels come with a lifetime warranty. Now, there's a birthday sale that kicks off on April 29th, and you won't want to miss it. You can get the biggest savings of the year on sheets, bedding, towels, loungewear, and their newest hammam and linen collections. And if you can't wait, you can get 10% off your first order and free shipping on the all-new sheet right now when you use promo code CHECK only at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com.
And then CZECH? I'm guessing it's a Czech Republic based.
No, it's Czech like a
as in our
Czech.
Podcast. Okay.
CHECK. Yes.
That's very, very nice of them to do.
So brooklinen.com, promo code CHECK. It's everything you need to live your most comfortable life.
Yeah. And I let's just say I have my cart full right now. I'm ready to place an order. I don't even think I can wait for that sale because Lord knows I need extra sheets these days.
Let's get back to George Miller, though, because now we're just completely off the George Miller track.
Yeah, it's an interesting little thing.
It's interesting.
That's very interesting.
But he's not one of those guys at all.
No.
And he's a bit of an interloper.
Yeah.
And he's using Hollywood tools and stars here.
Yeah.
But I feel like he's making something that I'm sure they like this, or like I'm sure that the Scorseses of the world were intrigued by this movie or whatever.
Yeah.
If they even bothered to see it.
If they
That's
even
the
bothered to
question,
see it, right? But like, it's not like this movie is coming out and people are like, "You gotta stick around." Like,
Right.
I wish
welcome to the Hollywood establishment, right?
I wish
Even though
this
he's getting
movie had
Oscar
come out in the age
nominations.
of Twitter. This is one of the few things that I wish
Sure.
had happened in the age of Twitter.
The
would have
Nolte
been-
memes.
the Nolte memes.
Yeah.
But I feel like it would have found an audience.
Well,
Sure.
even just in the way that something like Dark Water or like Margaret, like
Or Sully.
right. I mean,
Sully.
we're talking about three.
Hey, these guys, they eyeballed it with the oil. No, I don't know. I can't do a Sully.
But
joke.
all three of those are movies where I had experiences that are kind of similar to what you described seeing Lorenzo's Oil.
right, we walking out being like, why isn't everyone talking about
Right,
it?
like Sully,
Yeah.
I saw a couple weeks in, but I was like, no critics are standing up for this. I guess this movie sucks after thinking the trailer was good. And then I sat there in a theater like alone at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and was like, why is no one addressing the fact that this honks?
Sully's good. Come on, Bill.
No insensitivity to the geese who got killed by Sully.
Come on, Bill.
Yeah,
Come on,
I don't
Bill.
love Sully.
It's a Sully.
I
Come on.
don't
What
love.
about,
I
what
like.
about all the
I like.
souls?
I like.
Do you know how many souls were on that plane?
I've forgotten how many souls are on the plane.
155.
And do you know how many survived?
All of them. Yep. Every single one.
Yeah, there was no chance he could make it to Teterboro. He couldn't.
So the plot of Lorenzo's
They didn't have the thrust. They lost thrust. He couldn't make it to Teterboro.
He's what's his name? Augusto
Yes.
Odone.
Yes.
He works for the World Bank.
Uh-huh.
They're on the Comoro Islands. That's what they're called, right?
The Comoros.
This is just the opening credit sequence.
Yes.
By the
and
time the
with his
titles are
wife and
done,
his son.
you're landed in D.C.
And then they're back in D.C. His son starts acting weird. He has ALD. He has this brain degeneration sort of disease, right? Like it's like.
I mean,
his
the film-
body lacks the
it's-
enzymes to process
right.
these fatty oils, and so it starts to like destabilize your entire nervous
it's
system.
degenerative,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It like
And-
melts away your fucking brain.
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
And the film does. We're doing a poor job of explaining it, but the film does a great job of explaining.
Really invested in explaining it to
Yeah,
you.
and every 5 or 10 minutes you get like an analogy, a comparison.
Sure,
of,
someone will be like, "Well, this is like
yeah.
the wiring of the brain," and
Yeah.
here, like that's well, I'll explain what myelin
Yeah,
is. To
and I
you.
love
Yeah.
all those explanations. Like
Me
it's like
too.
like I can easily see a critic saying, why are we getting so many explanations? I would not cut a single one. In fact,
it's-
I would love like a 4-hour director's cut of just them explaining
It's the juice of
explaining
this
shit.
movie.
The
And
oil,
it is,
one might say.
well, and it's also this like incredible in he has from the actual true events, which are like, here are two people who are very intellectually curious, but have no
Naturally
background in
so.
Madison.
Right.
Medicine.
I mean, right? Because like
Mad
one
Madison.
of Nolte's biggest scenes is that scene where he's at the whiteboard and he's trying, right? And like she's like, right, this is you.
Yeah.
It's just you tackling
kitchen sink,
something
yeah.
you've never had to tackle.
They're
before.
obsessive
Right.
people who like believe in the like never-ending quest for knowledge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who just then go like,
There's
bear
gotta
with
be
us.
something.
We don't
Right.
understand this, but let's discuss this in detailed terms
Right.
that can appeal to a layperson, and let's get into it deeply because we want to know this shit first.
Yeah. And the fact is they're smart.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
movie is not afraid to make them smart. And the movie is not afraid
And-
to also say, the fact that these people were intellectually curious like led to their being able to do this. There's a certain
Right.
amount of, and that's interesting.
And but it does acknowledge that like they were a little alienating, and
Right.
they become part of a community of people whose kids suffer from this disease, and the community doesn't.
a community
love
of
them.
great character actors. by the
Great.
way.
I mean, you
Yeah.
got Reb Horn, you got Margot Martindale.
Anytime you
got,
have Ann Dowd and Margot Martindale in the same movie, you're playing with a hot hand.
I mean, this is Laura Linney's first,
Her first
I think,
appearance.
first movie.
Her number one
Yeah.
first appearance.
And when she shows up, you're like, hey, it's Laura Linney, like same as ever.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like she's
She really just
strikingly-
hit the ground running. Like her first appearance, and she looks like Laura Linney. She's giving a perfect Laura Linney performance. Like she had no adjustment time to being a film actress.
You also have the great Kathleen. I never know how to say her name. Will Hoyt, something
Oh,
like that,
sure.
as the sister, who
Who's great,
is in ER,
Yeah,
as
so good in
Dr.
that.
Lewis's sister is in Gilmore Girls, as Luke's sister. She's always a good sister
She's a good
character
sister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
who has like kind of like a sort of fun sister energy, right? You
Right,
imagine
right.
like her house is a lot of tchotchkes.
Yeah.
She's the sister who went backpacking in
100%,
Europe
right.
and Asia.
But we're jumping all around here. It is like I kept on waiting, and I don't know why, because I inherently trust George Miller. I trust your judgment, Bilge. I've never heard anything bad about this movie, even if it isn't discussed much. But I kept on waiting for the movie to make a sort of cringy mistake. And are they going to demonize the doctor? Are they going to demonize the other families in the support group? Any of those sorts of things. And I think this movie is so good at the sort of the rules of the game. The great tragedy of the world is that everyone has their reasons.
Right.
Right. In a way that is so heartbreaking and is kind of equally devastating to the story of this young man's physical and mental deterioration is the story of everyone has a reason for doing something that seems obstinate, destructive, closed-minded.
And it doesn't shy away from showing you that. That's the thing. Like it's not like it doesn't it avoids making those mistakes, but it doesn't avoid doing the things that you think it's going to do. It just does them really well.
It's not like everyone in this movie is a saint or a villain.
Yeah.
Right, they're just people.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of conflict between them and the other families. Yeah. There's tons of conflict between them and the doctors. And then also, I mean, I always bristle sometimes when people say certain movies are emotionally manipulative, but this seems like a movie that would be emotionally manipulative. You've got a sick child in danger who's basically dying. Right. They could tiptoe around it.
Right.
But they don't. They show you the things that are happening to him. They show you the things that are happening to the other kids. They show you the child
witnessing his
looking
future,
at
which
another
is really,
child who is further along.
When he has the pumpkin.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that like a lesser director would either cut or just fuck up completely.
Sure.
And George Miller is like, no, I'm going for it.
Not only that, and I feel like I'm going to lack the language to explain this properly and hope that you will step up to the plate. But the first chunk of the movie where Lorenzo is being played by this main young actor who never acted again, and do you know this, became an editor-in-chief at Forbes magazine.
Works at Forbes, Zach O'Malley
has written 3 books on the hip-hop industry.
Yeah. He's like some media.
And is now writing about celebrity VC culture.
Yes, he is. But also, his voice as he degenerates is being done by E.G. Daily,
one thing I wish I hadn't looked up
being
before
done by fucking Tommy Pickles from Rugrats.
But also, am I wrong about this? Am I wrong in thinking she is also the voice of Babe?
You're right. She's the voice of Babe in Babe, Pig in the City.
And the first one, I believe Babe is voiced by Chucky.
Christine Cavanaugh, who is
Chucky
indeed
Finster.
The voice of Chucky Finster. How strange. It really is funny to think there were just like 8 ladies like in the 90s who did all children.
Yeardley Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. But I regret looking that up in advance because then every time Lorenzo screamed, I was like, that's a Rugrat. I recognize the tones of a Rugrat.
But also, I think the actor playing Lorenzo changes obviously as he's getting older.
Yeah,
and
I think there are like 4 different actors.
Right, exactly.
Well, this is what I was going to say.
Most of them is Zach O'Malley.
Right. The first third of the movie is like Zach O'Malley doing performances with makeup augmentation, but he is very visible. He is present in scenes. You're watching his degradation. And then the last chunk of the film, you have an older actor. He's more visible again. You're watching him sort of find a pathway back to some level of agency in his own life. But there's the midsection of the film in which Lorenzo becomes very visually abstract. Like the movie is not shying away from what he's going through, but you are rarely seeing his face. It always becomes this sort of like chiaroscuro lighting, this sort of expressionistic tapestry, and it feels like the sounds of the machines that are keeping him alive are overpowering everything else. I mean, he starts to feel like some sort of bizarre monster within their home.
Yes.
And everyone's talking about him.
Looking. Yeah.
And he's almost always in frame, but you're almost never seeing him cleanly. And I think there's an interesting balance of trying to make sure you understand, you're feeling the disturbingness of the state that this child is in, but the film also doesn't become exploitative in trying to show you sort of the medical degradation.
Yeah, but it kind of has to do that, I think, because it's also it's trying to make you think, because it's going to sort of pull the rug out from under you later, but he wants us to think that this child has no self anymore, has no sense of self anymore.
Lorenzo's just an idea now that everyone in the movie is debating. So we're not showing you his face because his face is kind of irrelevant at this point.
There's that scene where the nurse
he's
is
the
just
Palpatine clone.
Right.
Kind of kept there.
the dead speak.
Yeah. We're all just arguing around him.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where the nurse is like rushing through the story that she's been asked to tell him.
Yeah.
And they get in that fight over.
Really good.
like later on when Susan Sarandon is reading that story and he starts to blink and roll his eyes a little bit. I mean, that scene is also so powerful when she's just like, oh my God, you're there.
Yeah.
You just can't communicate with us, but you're there, you're growing up, you're older, and I've been reading you Peter Rabbit all this time.
I mean, my fucking nightmare. That flipped me out so hard. Like, as much as it's a moment of victory, that it's also tinged with like, wait a second, this guy has just spent 10 years having the same fucking Peter Rabbit book read to him over and over and over again. He couldn't express himself.
I mean.
What existential terror.
It really does. Like, and at that point, you kind of lock into, and I believe it's right at that point that you get a Lorenzo's eye point of view shot. Of the mobile in the hanging above him. And then you get a close up of him, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, like there's a person in there.
As she's reading to him, you're seeing from his eyes for the first time in a long time, and it also feels like that scene is the first time you're clearly seeing his face in like 40 minutes of screen time.
Sure.
You know, the movie has just been shooting him from angles where you're seeing someone working his leg. Or you're seeing him in the background out of focus with the machine whirring or whatever it is.
Yeah, but there's, I mean, I'm just trying to, like, there's so many scenes in this movie that made me sit up. Like, obviously, Nick Nolte falling down the stairs in operatic agony as the camera zooms in on words in a diagnosis book. Like, that was when I first was like, oh, this is, George Miller is here. Like, this is crazy. But the scene where the doctor helps him walk in front of all the other doctors is another scene where, like, the whole time you're like, what is this scene doing here? I don't, like, this doesn't have anything to do with anything except that it's, like, something that's happening. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Like, it's not like that informs the plot in a major way.
But it is.
It's part. It's very. I'm not saying it's superfluous at all. It's very. You know, you're seeing that side of the medical industry that's trying to help him, like, and how it can be a little sterile, but it's not unfeeling.
The paradox of the paradox of the fact that in order to help you and in order to help cure this thing, we have to treat you almost like a guinea, like an object,
right? Like a zoo animal, and also that the whole time the doctor is sort of saying, like, I'm going to help kids like you.
Yeah.
That the doctors are all kind of acknowledging, like, you know, this is a disease that you can't reverse. Like, that this isn't, we're not going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
That thing that feels very callous and unfeeling, but is sort of just didactic of, look, there's no pathway out of this. It's 2 years. It's done. It's too late. The best thing we can do, not to be unfeeling, is to be able to extract whatever data we need and can.
It's like a doctor
from
asking
your
for
child.
your organ, you know, like in an organ donation, things like that.
15 years from now, we might crack this, you know? Which it's like, if you're on the other end of that table, once you start being able to put aside your grief for a second, I think you go, how dare my kid get reduced to, I mean, she almost directly says this. This is my child. This is not some number. He's not a case study. He's not an example, you know. He's not a data point. But that's the most responsible thing for them to do, clinically.
Yeah,
sure.
And that's why I think that scene of Nolte breaking down in the stairs,
incredible
scene, and so important. You know, it's like I mean, to a parent who is discovering this. I mean, this is the thing. I have a problem sometimes with the way grief is depicted in movies because it's, you know, people are such kind of noble sufferers.
Sure.
And I've seen some films recently where it's like just scene after scene after scene of people, you know, kind of lightly crying. Like the idea that you have to be understated with this sort of thing. And here, George Miller is like, let me tell you what it's like to be a father who just found out his son is going to die. His 6-year-old son is going to die. And it is brutal and also incredibly beautiful. Like, you know, if I had to rewatch a scene from this movie, it would probably be that scene, even though it is utterly emotionally devastating.
But then you have the other thing, too. I mean, the scene where the doctor delivers the news to them for the first time, Sarandon does, like, a masterclass of underplaying.
Yeah.
Where it's just locked into
that's
this two
kind of
shot
the,
of
like, you're hearing the words but not really understanding
them. And
them.
she's just very calmly asking the logical series of follow-up questions. And as she's asking them, she is recognizing, oh my God, I'm on the verge of crying.
Right.
Like, she's playing that thing of, oh, I'm surprised that I suddenly can't and say these words. I can't get them out of my throat.
And that's the shot. That's the scene where the style stops.
Right.
That's the scene where, like, the camera stops moving.
Yeah.
They even like do this whole thing of like there's this fan in the background, and the doctor's like, oh my God, we don't need that thing, and it becomes totally silent.
Right. Yeah.
Really, I think the only time in the movie where it's like total silence.
And totally
It's
locked down.
another very weird, little interesting moment in this movie too, right? Where you're like, why are we seeing this? I love to be clear that we're seeing that.
Oh, well, we'll get to my favorite little weird thing in this movie. But he is, for a guy who is so... His films are so designed, they're so controlled, they're so him trying to fully get the thing in his mind down on film. He does really let actors control a scene, in a weird way. Even if he's specifically directing them to hit a specific thing, the very nature of his filmmaking and storytelling style, the fact that he is such an sort of such a subjective, emotion-first, visceral, expressionistic filmmaker means you're sort of saying to both the camera and the actors, you're going to sell the feeling of this thing. Because I don't want conventional Hollywood sort of histrionics.
He's not afraid of melodrama.
No, which I love.
And which requires a lot of the actor. I mean, it's like Douglas Sirk.
Yeah, sure.
One of the most stylized filmmakers of all time, but also includes like actors just like going for it.
The staircase thing, the moment leading up to it, where he's reading through all the papers and the papers are cross-fading into one another, and you're landing very quickly on certain words that are standing out. And the shot that they keep on cross-cutting with is Nolte just reading intensely. And his eyes are so wide open. It is fully cartoonish.
Yeah.
No one looks like that when they are reading something, regardless of how worrying the thing they're reading is.
Yeah.
But that is how you feel when you're reading something like that. And it's a thing that Miller understands. And it allows him to avoid the scene where people explain everything they're feeling, which is where these movies slow down and become boring.
Yeah, these movies that often are like, don't worry, we'll have a scene that does all that work, and that scene is a miserable slog.
Okay, I want to try to very concisely express a thing that I struggled to say in our Fury Road episode, which is already in the can. Okay. Rachel marked that this is maybe an excuse to cut this tangent from the Fury Road episode. So Susan Sarandon said in some fairly recent career retrospective thing where she was going over all of her different roles. Michelle Pfeiffer was the first choice for this movie. Yes. She was supposed to do it. She dropped out because she was offered Catwoman.
Yes.
Because
came out this year.
Annette Bening had gotten pregnant.
Right.
There was like a domino
effect.
It was
a weird, right. But so then he goes down the line to the next, which is the strict call sheet person. Yeah.
Right. He's like, Sharon Nolte might not work for this movie.
Sure.
I'll do it with Sarandon. And Sarandon said that the plan when they were making this film, as it was designed, was it would look how it looks at the beginning, and then over the course of the film, it would slowly desaturate and desaturate and desaturate into black and white until the scene with the book where Lorenzo suddenly sort of is able to communicate with them, and it would come back into color.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the whole idea, and that they literally could not afford to do it. Because as opposed to today, when Bong Joon-ho or George Miller can just
do that,
and put it out online or re-release it into theaters, it was a photochemical process that required retiming every single shot. And she said, we just ran out of money. Weird anecdote, she said that was the second time that had happened in my career. Rocky Horror was supposed to be in black and white until Frankenfooter shows up on screen and then go into color.
Also a fun idea.
Yeah.
Fun idea, couldn't afford it, right?
So did they shoot it that way and then later realize they couldn't do it?
They shot everything in color, and what they couldn't afford was to photochemically adjust it.
So because there is, I mean, the film does have a unique cinematography to it. The way everything is lit, like there is, I mean, the actors always like just pop in a way that they tend not to in modern films.
It's very stark, high contrast, hard lighting. He even a bunch of times does that effect that you and I love, which I've never figured out the formal name for, but it's the thing that, dare I invoke him, Barry Sonnenfeld does in Addams Family with Angelica Houston, where he lights
where there's
the actors.
literally just like a little light on their
it's like
eyes.
just the sliver of their eyes.
Like
they're in a confessional booth.
Sure.
You know? And
the thing with Morticia obviously is
the
just
most
hysterical because it's true in no matter what environment she's in. Yeah.
But he'll do that in this too.
Yeah,
and
it definitely has.
It's this thing that I was trying to get at when talking about the black and white version, why I don't really care about it, the Fury Road episode, is that for me it feels like a half measure, but it also feels redundant because what he's trying to get at is making you think differently about the film you've already seen, right? By presenting it in a slightly different format, you reconsider it a little bit. But all it makes you really reconsider is George Miller is one of the few filmmakers who still makes movies like a silent filmmaker.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, when you put a thing in black and white like Fury Road, all it does...
I remember your Fury Road tangent now. Right.
Cut all of it out.
No,
I'm
don't
doing
cut
it
it
here.
out.
But this is like watching this...
I kind of dunk on your ass when you say it. It's a
you
great
dunk
moment.
on me. It's a savage burn. I'm like Boston Market. I'm roasted with a side of mac and cheese. But it is that kind of thing where I was like, it's unnecessary. And as much as I would love to see him put out the version where he's color timed it the way he wanted to originally, it's the fact that he is willing to say to Nick Nolte, in this scene, you have to go full Valentino. In this scene, I'm going to light it in a way where no room would ever possibly look because I'm going to light it in the way that their brain feels at that moment.
Right.
You know, when they receive this news. And it is this thing that, like, you know, the old silent filmmakers used to talk about where they're like, it's such a shame that sound came along. People were finally figuring out how to use film.
Yeah.
And then it became this easy crutch where you can just have a person walk on and be charming. And I love dialogue-based films. I love performance-based films. I love naturalistic films. I love comedies, whatever. But there was something to the fact that people had to really figure out a way to convey an emotion when so many basic tools were stripped away from theater.
Yeah.
You know, from most performance that we knew. And Miller is this guy where his movies kind of play like silent films. You could watch this movie for as much as it has all the detailed science medicine talk. You could watch this film and I think pretty much get the entire emotional narrative just from the images and from the visuals.
That's funny
of the
considering
performances.
how much information is actually dispensed in this film, but
No,
sure.
that's what I think makes him a master, is he is using the dialogue for things that only dialogue can do.
Yeah.
And he is using the visuals for the things that people usually rely on.
It's also just funny that there
are
are so many people in this movie who are obviously playing themselves, these professionals. The best of them, of course, being the British fucking olive oil guy.
Sotheby, oh my
who
God.
rules. And there's that scene where he's like, can you tell him I'm done with that and I'm going off to home now?
So this is my example of my favorite little thing that doesn't need to be in the movie. Of course, this guy's an important character.
Yeah.
But for this guy to have his own little mini
It
beef
rules.
his little story that's like, well, I figured I was going to retire in 6 months anyway. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And his coworkers being like, should we be worried about him?
Right.
But I love that shot of the two guys,
yes.
which is like, you know, like something out of 1940. It's like something out of an Ealing comedy.
Yes.
You know?
Guys, to be clear, what's happening in the film is they need to extract certain fatty acids from oil to create Lorenzo's oil, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like a expensive chemical process
Right.
that no one would ever do
In
because
the-
it has no purpose.
In the
except
dumbest,
for
most
this.
reductive way, after like sort of hitting their head against the wall, doing all the things the doctors tell them to do, being told that nothing's going to work.
Right.
Nolte and Sarandon push through and recognize that one of the key issues is that his body is misinterpreting these, what do they call them, long chain
Fatty acids.
fatty acids.
Right.
And they land on this thing that is, what if we could trick the body into thinking that that was being done or that it didn't need to do that, and recognizing that there's a relationship between that action and an element in olive oil. And thus this
And
film
then
becomes...
rapeseed oil later on.
Right.
Yeah.
This film becomes an oil thriller.
It does.
But when you hear the title, you go like, what's it? Oil barons
It's
and the
an oil
Texas plains?
procedural.
It is
But
the
no.
greatest food movie of all
Right.
time.
Right. And
That's
of course,
the
then it
other
makes
weird
sense
thing this
that
movie
the
has
hero
going for it.
should be Italian. It's an
Right.
olive oil movie.
Yeah.
God, the meals in this movie look so good.
do.
Anytime he makes a little
And then those
pasta.
scenes like when he's eating the spaghetti
Yeah.
with his hands,
With his
but you
hand.
don't see him doing that. You see Nolte doing
Yes.
that. And then we move around and see the rest
Everybody's
of the family's
doing it, yeah.
imitating Lorenzo.
good.
I love shit like that.
Yeah.
And all those things are very sweet until they, like you say, they almost become sort of fetishistic, like in a weird way,
Yeah.
right? Like
Right.
the Peter Rabbit thing.
Yeah, like this, you know, they become obsessed with this.
Yes, right.
understandably so. Like, what
Yeah.
else are you going to be obsessed with if you're a mom to a sick child? That is your that's your obsession in life.
Well, and the scene where she outlines it, where she's just like, maybe you're right, but I cannot live with the idea that maybe he's in there and his mind is totally alive and we're doing nothing.
Right.
That we're not stimulating.
Right, it's a freaky idea.
Even if it's unlikely, what a fucking nightmare that would be.
Well, and also the emotional trajectory of the fact that she, learns fairly early on that he got it from her.
Yeah.
Like the fact that this is a
That
thing
scene
that
is
mothers
incredible.
carry,
Right,
and
right.
only boys get it.
Yeah.
Which is, which is like just devastating.
Right.
And it informs everything she does. And you only you hear it, you learn it once.
Yeah.
And then later on, and of course it's this thing that's like this unspoken thing between them until finally Nolte blows up at one point, and it's just like, you're ashamed of, you and your poisoned blood.
Right.
But he has to say it in Italian.
He says it in Italian.
He has
And the
to say it in
subtitles are
Italian.
kind of cool and interesting. Yes.
Like a more reserved version of Tony Scott.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's really, really, like that is this thing that is informing her character, but the film only touches on it a couple of times.
It's sort of
But-
unspoken,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you have people talk around it too, the fact that this is presumably Nolte's second marriage. He has two adult children.
Yeah.
This is her first and only child. She
Right.
had a child late in life.
Yeah.
And her siblings did not pass on this gene to their kids.
Yeah,
Yeah, then
exactly.
it was a die roll every time, and she got the bad die
Right.
roll.
And they say, like, this must be so hard for her because she waited this long to finally have one child. You already have two other ones.
Yeah.
We all
And
have
he
other-
has that weird guilt about that too. You can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah.
And he plays it. The whole time watching the movie, I knew Sarandon had gotten an Oscar nomination. And I was sort of like, at first, just sort of waiting for her, like, whatever, big histrionic moment. And then I guess she has, of course, like very emotional moment, but she never has those. She never has like an Oscar scene,
No.
which I loved.
Yeah.
I'm sort of surprised she snuck in,
Yeah, I mean, she never
especially
even-
because this movie wasn't a big deal. I think it was partly just she was a very
I
respected
think she was
actress.
automatic, and it's weird that, I mean, the only other
Lost
nomination
to
this
Emma
got
Thompson
is
for Howard's
the
End.
the only other nomination this got was the screenplay nom, which this is a good screenplay, but that also feels not like honoring the film because the writing is the strong suit. It feels like that thing where they're like, you were right outside of our 5, so we'll give you that as a consolation prize.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the film would have gotten nominated for screenplay if George Miller hadn't also written the screenplay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think people. I mean, I have no idea what the actual Oscar campaign for this
Sure.
movie was like, if there even was one.
I think that,
But
I
I'm
mean,
sure-
it was released at Oscar time
Yeah,
by a
but-
big studio.
It
But I'm
was-
sure
yeah.
I'm sure they played up the fact that he was a doctor,
Right.
And that. I mean, I do remember them playing that up. I mean, I remember that was in the press materials, and I think that was an I mean, I don't
It's
think
acknowledgement,
but
right.
I don't think this was a case where. If there had been 10 Best Picture nominees, this was not going to be one of them. I'd like this was not that well
I
regarded.
guess, I mean,
you know?
it clearly had its defenders, in small pockets, but this is such a director's movie
Yeah.
that it feels so perverse, even if you know it's because the movie didn't make much of an
That
impact.
it got a screenplay
to give
nom.
him the
Yeah, I
screenplay
get it.
nom
It's like,
instead. Yeah.
And did Fury Road get a screenplay nomination?
I'm sure it didn't.
It did not,
it did
right?
not.
Yes.
And that too is actually such a well written. I mean,
Right.
it's filled with just. Quite aside from the fact that like screenwriting is not just dialogue,
Yes. Sure.
but it's filled with incredibly beautiful, like poetic
Yes.
dialogue, as is
It
this
did not,
one.
yeah.
But I think that is the reason it didn't get the screenplay nomination.
Sure,
Is so many people, even so many screenwriters, tend to judge screenplays by
Yeah.
dialogue.
By, like, rat-a-tat.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what they're not acknowledging is that movie has some of the most airtight economic characterization and plotting
Oh, yeah,
of
absolutely.
anything in the last 25 years.
He's got such an interesting Oscar run
It's so weird.
because of this random nomination.
Right. This
which
is his first nomination of any sort.
Right, which is then followed by two Babe, producing and writing Babe.
Right.
And then followed by winning an Oscar for making
Happy
Happy
Feet.
Feet.
Right.
Yeah.
And then followed by, of course, like the Mad Max Fury Road,
Right.
a sequel, his fourth sequel to Mad
He's
Max,
only-
becoming a critical and awards darling.
We can talk about it in every
It's very
single
strange.
episode of this miniseries, and it never will seem like reality.
I remember at the. I don't think you were a member yet
of the
Dave.
Critics Circle? No,
Of
I
the
think I was
Critics
like
Circle.
a year before.
But I
was, yeah.
remember while the. I mean, it didn't win anything from us.
Yeah,
because-
what was
because,
that?
Because we're idiots.
That was the Carol year. Carol did really well that
Was that
year.
the Carol
I
year?
think.
Yeah, I think Carol won.
Yeah.
But I do remember whoever was reading off the
votes.
The
Whoever was
votes.
the chair, right.
The first vote they got that said Fury Road.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was for Best Picture. I remember them going, "Huh."
Really?
And I was like,
You were like, what
Really?
the fuck, dude?
Huh?
Yeah.
It is so funny how we make.
I don't remember if the person who was reading off the
Someone
nominee-
said,
but
"Uh-huh."
somebody said, "Huh."
There was that
right,
energy.
right. There was,
and I was just like, really?
You're like,
Where-
this is
where
coming.
Have you
Like,
been?
Yeah.
There was the year that what's the movie called? Support the Girls.
Yeah.
Was a contender, and Eric Cohn had to say "Jungle Pussy" like 25 times during the supporting actress votes.
Best supporting actress contender, Jungle Pussy. Just
he
to
had-
be
you know,
clear
you-
for
you-
those who don't know, that is her credited name as an actress. in that.
It's a great. I actually love her performance in that movie so much. It made sense to me, but like just because he has to read out like,
Yeah.
and at a certain point you might be reading 3 names per ballot, and he's
Right.
just. So it's like, Saoirse Ronan, Kristen Stewart, Jungle Pussy, like just like over and over again. Like, anyway, it's a very
Good
funny
times.
thing we do every year.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of, adults sitting in a room writing little
Yeah.
names on pieces of paper.
Yeah. And then changing those names.
Yes.
David, we're at a weird time right now. We're at a weird crux, okay? I
Yeah.
don't mean to get political.
Yeah.
But it has been circulating around the news that the government is not properly offering financial support to the United States Postal Service.
Sure.
A pillar of our democracy that is literally written into the Constitution. Our government is letting it flounder. Now, here's where things get tricky. You want to go out, you want to support the post office as much as you can, but also
Tough to go out right now.
we should be staying home. A post office is a dangerous place to
Mostly
be.
want to stay home.
Right. So how do you strike this balance of supporting the United States Postal Service while also being responsible to your fellow man, woman, and child by staying indoors?
Well, anything you can do at the post office, you can do at stamps.com.
Oh,
they have
stamps.com.
on-demand postage, which you can skip the trip to the post office. It brings all the services of the Postal Service right to your computer. Okay, so if you're sending invoices, or you're an online shipper shipping out products, or you're a warehouse sending thousands of packages a day, stamps.com can handle it.
Yes. Look, I mean, you get 5 cents off of every first-class stamp. You're not just saving time, you're also saving money, up to 40% off of shipping rates.
Right. You can just use your computer, print official postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. And once it's ready, you just hand it to your mail carrier or you drop it in a mailbox. It's that simple. No wonder over 700,000 small businesses already use stamps.com.
It is the responsible, socially distant way to keep your mail going. And this is a particularly nice time to think about sending a letter to your loved ones.
Yeah, that's true. And right now, look, our listeners can get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in check. That's stamps.com, enter check.
Okay, now I'm not going to be fooled again. This time, it is, in fact, CZEC.
No,
right?
It's
What?
check again, just regular old check.
Well, that makes it so much easier to remember. People using our promo codes this week only have to remember the one.
Check.
Check.
Stamps.com, enter check.
Check.
I love all these little side narratives, though. I mean, in the sort of everyone has their reasons, everyone has their own internal life.
Yeah.
That this guy who finally cracks the code in distilling the missing element, the other oil they need to perfect this cocktail, is his last thing before he hangs it up in his illustrious career making cosmetics.
Yeah, and then the other guy, the chemist with his little workplace affair that's happening.
Becky Ann Baker, who's constantly he's like, I don't have time
She's
for
always
this.
inserting herself.
And she keeps calling it out and being like, you got a bunch of that lying around.
Right.
You have 6 people who could do that.
Right.
And I mean, that the other thing, after you watch this movie so many times, everyone from this movie that I ever see in another movie, I'm like, oh yeah, it's the guy from Lorenzo's Oil. It's
For
it's the
you,
person-
this is the
Yeah,
baseline.
that-
Like if they were
exactly.
in you still see Laura Linney and you're like, oh, from Lorenzo's Oil.
Yeah.
She's kind of mean about his behavior in
But
school.
each of them has a story. Each of them has a I don't know them as the actor from Lorenzo's Oil. I know them as that's the nurse that didn't want to read the thing, or that's the nurse who just felt like they really needed to take him to a hospital. Like everyone has a purpose and kind of a life beyond the frame, even though the film is not like kind of this, Mike Leigh, Ken Loach style. It's this very controlled type of film.
Right.
It really kind of breaks free of the frame too.
But the Rebhorn scene,
he's great.
where-
He so rarely plays compassionate people. Like he plays so many villains and like
a lot of judges,
greedy
lot of-
guys, right? That like it is always interesting to see him playing more of just like a concerned dad.
Yeah.
type,
If you want to cry, which anyone who watched Lorenzo's own preparation for this movie is probably pretty dried out at this point.
I don't know that there's a movie that makes me cry more than this. I watched it again. I actually watched it this morning at like 4 a.m. And my God, I was just like, oh God. And I know everything that's happening. I've seen it so many times.
Yes.
And I just I just couldn't stop.
I very rarely cry at movies. I didn't cry watching this, but it did give me that all-consuming sense of grief and dread that I have not felt for a movie on this podcast since Saving Private Ryan.
Wow.
Where I'm like, this is exquisitely torturous.
Yeah.
I understand why it's doing so. It's not manipulative, but Jesus Christ, is this hard to watch.
Yeah, and I was worried that I was not going to be able to keep a straight face talking about it.
Sure.
I was actually worried a little bit this morning. I was like, I hope I'll be able to actually talk about this movie without breaking up.
Well, so if you want to cry, look up the stories about when James Rebhorn died a couple years ago.
God, yeah.
He was fucking one of the best undersung character actors
he's
in the world.
To me, a very big deal as well. First, he was just in a lot of movies I saw as a kid. He was off, Independence Day, like things like that. Like
The Game.
The
He's
Game.
so good in The Game.
I got to work
as a
with
kid,
him.
I loved The Game.
Oh, I still love The Game.
No, The Game rules.
I got to work with him on the failed Chris Gethard sitcom Big Lake.
Oh yeah, of
in which
course.
He, played
He was
Chris
the
Gethard's
dad, right?
father.
Yeah.
Which was a multi-camera show, so I wasn't scenes with him, but everyone's there all the time.
They're just hanging out.
But then when I had to go in to do ADR, they were running way behind, and he was the person before me in the sign-in sheet.
Right.
And I just sat there and talked to him for like 85 minutes, which there are the times that I feel most confident in my decision to pursue acting is when I get to just talk to like a just total consummate pro, nice
Who's
person,
been
character
everywhere
actor
and
like
worked
that,
with a zillion people
and just hear their stories about everything.
Yeah.
But when he died, he wrote letters to his children
Oh, yeah,
that
I
were
remember
published
this, yeah.
that are unbelievable.
Yeah.
Are just some of the most elegant, graceful.
He also wrote his own obituary. Which
That's what I'm thinking
Right,
of.
yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah, right,
that's what
yeah,
I'm thinking of.
yeah.
It's his own obituary where people talk about like, oh, he died gracefully. He faced his oncoming death with grace. And so often I'm like, we want to reduce these things to these narratives. Who is graceful in the face of death? But then you read something like this, and it is astonishing. Anyway, parallel to this movie and this emotion, the opposite end of that spectrum, the scene where they invite them over for dinner and they're trying to sell them on the effectiveness as the oil, which
And
at
it's a
this
scene
point,
that begins, and it's a very friendly.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've already had tension back and
yeah,
forth with this couple. They proactively reach out. They're so happy that they're being involved into something. Then they get there and they realize that the group is a little bit more emotional support group for the parents dealing with these things than trying to find a cure for the children. Because everyone has told them it's impossible. It's 2 years, you're done. There's no sake in fighting it. The best thing your kid can do is be another data point. So just figure out how to not let your relationship fall apart.
Yeah.
And Sarandon has that thing where it's like, I have not heard one person say anything about their kids. And Martindale is the one person who they kind of relate to who's similarly bullheaded.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're going back and forth with Rebhorn and his wife. They make this slight breakthrough with the first version of the oil, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Before you say that,
Yeah.
though, this film does. I mean, here's how good and effective this film is. This film includes the line, "But what about the children? Won't somebody think of the children?"
Right.
And it works.
It fucking
Right.
works.
And it doesn't sound like a Simpsons character.
Yeah,
Right.
Right. It does so many things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a
True.
scene where the mob is standing up and
Right.
going, "We demand the oil! Give us the oil!"
Like it's like this film could have Chappie and it would be perfect. Like it'd be like, "Yep, there's Chappie."
Of course, we all maybe chat. He was part of synthesizing the oil. You have to give him an appearance,
Bilge, I think you might have just added something to the blank check vernacular. There are certain terms that guests have granted us that we then apply to other movies. I think the Chappie test is one of them.
Right? Could Chappie be in this movie and not
It's
upset
still
its
work.
tonal balance?
Would Chappie disrupt the ecosystem of this movie? And look, many great films could not survive a Chappie.
Oh, yeah.
It is not the only litmus test that matters, but it is a test of a certain type of control and conviction, and I think sincerity that even Chappie.
Bram Stoker's Dracula could pull off a Chappie.
You think it could?
I think it could. Just because of tonal control, not because it's
got
perfect.
amazing tonal control.
Yeah.
That Reborn scene where, it's like, okay, they seem to be on good terms again. These people have sort of bristled at any time that they've tried to suggest any kind of unconventional methods pushing back against the system. But it seems to be friendly. Then they bring up the oil, and Reborn and wife just sort of go like, look, you understand how these things work. Big business. It takes this much time. You have to invest this much money, this and that. And Nolte and Sarandon push back in the way they do, in the self-righteous, like, not without my child kind of way. And Reborn just lets loose on them, not with anger, but just with pure frustration of like, do you not understand how fucking difficult my life has been?
Right.
I understand.
3 kids.
I've had 3 of these. I understand how frustrated you are. I went through the same fucking thing.
Right.
Like, welcome to the club. Now add 2. That's been my goddamn life. I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this. I don't have the bandwidth to try and fail anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's such an
the
empathetic
horrible
thing.
concept of like allowing yourself hope again. Like,
Right.
which just seems so frightening.
Right, where like in movies like this, it is very easy to turn those people into villains to be like, why are they being so unimaginative and stubborn? But the reality is, it's really fucking difficult to believe in something.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the most painful goddamn thing in the world. And it's, I imagine, a billion times more painful when the thing you're believing in is what you have been told is a completely incurable terminal illness. The other thing that we haven't talked about that I think this movie does so elegantly is the way it uses times and when it employs its intertitles about time passing.
Right.
And how much of the movie goes on where it's just updating the month and the year, and how long it takes until they make it clear 12 months after diagnosis. I mean, there's a lot of restraint. Where
it's like a case study.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
And it reminds me of Wendy and Lucy, where she keeps on going back to the imagery of her ledger. And you keep on seeing the numbers and being so aware of exactly how much money Michelle Williams has and how much everything's going to cost, so that every decision that is made in the film, you have that info just constantly pounded back into your brain. And the way they just, because at a certain point it gets abstract. You're like, okay, we're what? We're December of 84, but when did this start? I'm forgetting how much time passed. And I was thinking, oh, it's been 3 or 4 years. Somehow this kid is outlasting the diagnosis. And then that title card comes in like halfway through that is 12 months after diagnosis.
Right.
The sister shows Nolte the picture of the 3 of them on the beach and goes like, do you remember that was 21 months ago? I mean, all these things where it's how I imagine it feels to be in a position like this, where the days just feel endless, where life just slows down, you know?
Yeah.
And it feels like you've been stuck in this forever. And as you're coming up against, well, you know the prognosis they gave him was 24 months. So now we're 18 months after diagnosis. Now we're 20 months after diagnosis.
Yeah.
The second we crack 20, you're like, he could just go at any moment.
Yeah.
It's really elegant the way he does it.
Right. And which is why all the people that they interact with along the way gain such significance, especially once they start helping them. Like, I mean, Sotheby is a perfect example. I mean, he becomes the hero of the movie in that little scene.
Popping off to the shops. I'll see
Yeah,
you later.
yeah.
Oil's on the desk.
Yeah, like everybody who helps them, it just feels like such a huge monumental thing they've done when they're just like, we have the oil.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I have 3 dogs that Black Mile in, like we can start. Or even like the little the Polish rat study that they find. It just feels like this monumental thing, and it's shot with like this, you know, like this heroic crane. While
Yeah, and
she's
then
running,
what's
you know.
that? The scene, the medical conference where the Japanese doctor is speaking, and it's like almost a freaking like Bond movie or like a Tom Clancy movie or something like this thrilling conference in this other language, even though it's literally
And
Simultaneously bribing everyone with perfect pasta dinners.
Yeah. But it's also interesting because you see that, you know, that I think this is that one, that conference where they're all sitting there and they're talking, and then the camera tracks I believe, and you realize they're still in the hospital, and outside there's a corridor, and there's like 2 sick kids being like walking down the corridor. And it's like let's never forget what this is actually about. Like he doesn't allow you to forget that, and that's really important.
There is a thing I love that movies can do where they get you to acclimate to a normal you never thought you would have accepted at the beginning.
Right.
So when at the beginning the symptoms that Lorenzo is experiencing are really treated one by one, and you're watching a very, very subtle, gradual sort of diminishing, right? Where every single little thing he loses makes a big impact. Right. And the scene where he's coming down the stairs and he can't speak and she has to translate him, and it's the first time in the movie where he hasn't really been coherent to anyone other than his parents, hits you hard, and then it being Martindale's son in the door frame. Holding the basket.
That scene is insanely.
It's all. I mean, everyone remembers. I think has some experience as a kid.
When you see someone who's ill in a way you've never understood
and
before.
You don't know how to deal with it. It's 1,000 times worse if you know that you have the same disease that this kid is just a year ahead of you on. But then when an hour later into the movie, Martindale comes over and the kid is shotgun in her truck.
In the truck, yeah.
And she goes like, he's having a bad day. And Susan Sarandon walks over to him very calmly. And whereas Margot Martindale is clearly equally uncomfortable at Lorenzo coming down the stairs and not being able to speak, she's now at the state of resignation that Sarandon was at with Lorenzo. And Sarandon is so past that. She is completely unaffected by the fact that now Margot Martindale's son is starting to show those symptoms of losing his sort of verbal ability, because she's just like, I remember this. And it gets to a point where you go, God, I wish we were still at that stage of the movie.
Right.
We're 40 minutes past him being able to talk, period. The idea of this thing that previously was heartbreaking and was too uncomfortable to watch, now seeming like a respite.
Oh, yeah.
Is insane.
The shot of the kids coming out of school and, it tracks to the house, to the window, beyond which like Lorenzo's lying in bed, basically dying, which echoes the shot earlier of the kids coming out of school, and Lorenzo was one of the kids. You know?
There's that amazing shot too. It's their holiday party, the scene that canonically makes this a great Christmas movie.
The Santa coming to the, falling into the camera. It's great.
But then there's also that scene where she's like entertaining guests and she's telling a story, and it's deep focus of the windows behind her, and you see all the kids playing in the snow and Lorenzo riding by in the bicycle, and then one kid running off in his direction, and then everyone running off in his direction, and the frame becomes completely empty until the girl runs through the door and is like, he's bleeding a lot.
Yeah.
There's something very, I mean, it's
like a horror film.
I was going to say, I mean, he's using the tools of horror
It's something like that in, Twin Peaks has that too.
Yeah.
The first episode of Twin Peaks,
It's one of the most unsettling episodes of TV ever.
He strikes
so sad. Yeah. Lynch movies are so sad. I think people underrate how fucking sad they are. Like in a good way. You know? Like that.
Mulholland Drive could have pulled a Chappie.
100%.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about
Chappie
this.
could have said Silencio.
I'm still thinking about this.
Silencio, I am consciousness.
Chappie loves Silencio. Mommy loves Chappie.
What's he up to, Bonkamp?
Chappie?
Chappie, he has something, right? Isn't there something?
He just announced a new
I feel like he's always announcing that he's going to restart some franchise.
You're forgetting.
He made something, right?
The RoboCop thing.
He was supposed to do RoboCop, and it was the Halloween Superman Returns style. It's a direct sequel to only the first one. Peter Weller's back, and Neumeier is writing the script. He has now quit that, thank God. I feel like they hired someone else who is not the right choice, because the only right choice for that is Paul Verhoeven.
Sure.
But he announced he's doing some new low-budget...
He's doing a horror movie for MGM.
Yeah. And Chappie has not booked anything since that movie came out.
I think he's running in South Carolina or something, right? Like he's going to try and...
He's stealing votes away from Bernie.
He's also often going to movie theaters and pointing out when Leonardo DiCaprio shows up on screen.
Yeah, right. He's going to be at every First Cow screening to tell you that that's the first cow.
Yeah.
I believe there literally is a scene in First Cow where someone says, "It's the first cow."
I just want to check my notes here quickly. It also just says that Chappie loves Mommy and Mommy loves Chappie.
I haven't seen Chappie.
I saw it a second time recently, And
Why?
I was with my friends who I usually, when we hang out,
so it was like a fun thing to do.
we were like, "What's the weirdest
You
thing we
weren't
can
just
watch on
like
Netflix?"
flipping channels and sort of like, well, settle
This is
into
like
some
the
Chappie.
friend group who I made watch Old Dogs and Book of Henry, like all my Curio movies where I'm like, I really think this needs to be studied. And like Old Dogs and Book of Henry, watching Chappie the second time has that weird effect where you're like, well, now all of this feels less weird because I've just accepted that Chappie is Chappie. The first time you're watching Chappie, and most people never make it past the first time, you go, I can't accept any of this. And the second time you go into it, you go, well, of course, this is Chappie, and Chappie loves Mommy, Mommy loves Chappie, and Chappie's a real gangsta.
It's like you're in a film directed by George Miller.
It's a given.
Where
It's
you're the Overton window of what is acceptable has just completely.
That's what Miller's pushing that window, baby.
I mean, it's Fury Road is all about that.
100%.
You know, it's just like the things that
The
are
best
now
thing
normal.
about Fury Road
yeah,
is they're just like, we have to go to Gastown, and I'm like, I guess they got to go to Gastown, and I guess I know what Gastown is.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I love.
But as opposed to someone like Blomkamp,
Someone does this, and I'm like, yeah,
David's miming the spraying.
Yeah.
Blomkamp, who Chappie is him trying to do like, I'm going to mix 18 different tones and emotions and genres at the same time.
So glad we're talking about Chappie.
And can't pull it off. George Miller, it is...
should have made Chappie.
Should have made
Sure,
Chappie.
He probably would have nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He nailed a talking pig movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He can nail anything.
I've heard of a talkie, but a talkie piggy?
We're going to talk about it. We're going to talky piggy about it.
-5 comedy points. It is bizarre for someone who is such a manic filmmaker in so many ways to also be so thoughtful.
Sure.
And it is contradictory in a way that I can never quite understand how he pulls off that balance.
I guess I don't really think of him as magic. He's high energy, but his movies do always feel very considered, even like the Thunderdomes of the world.
But I think they are
Very high
manic
energy,
and
yeah.
considered at the same time, which
Yeah.
those two things seem counterintuitive. Are there any other things we're forgetting to talk
We
about?
should play
with the movie,
the box
Lorenzo's
office
All?
game, but yeah,
Sure.
Bilge, is there any as the sort of having seen it so many times? Are there little details that we haven't hit on?
Oh God,
Professor Emeritus of
it's fine
Lorenzo
if you don't
University.
No, I mean it's there's all this like I was actually going to look this up because I seem to recall. I mean, there's that scene where Amore arrives in DC in their Dulles airport, and it's shot like a scene out of an opera.
Yes, that seems very interesting because this is a character from the Comoro Islands.
Yeah.
Who is like Lorenzo's friend in the first 10 minutes, and they fly a kite together, and then he doesn't reappear until like basically 2 hours into the movie, like almost near the end.
Yeah, and apparently this is a
This is a real part
real
of their
person, real part of the
biography.
story.
Right.
But it reminds me of the scene earlier where Nolte goes to Peter Ustinov at the Opera House,
Right.
and he's and Nolte's wearing the same overcoat.
I love a confrontation in an opera house.
The confrontation in the Opera House is great, but then you see the scene later on. It's kind of a throwaway shot of Amore arriving at the airport, and Nolte is wearing the same outfit. And I believe Dulles Airport. I think you can correct me on this. I didn't get a chance to look it up, but I think it was designed by the same person who designed the Metropolitan Opera House.
Interesting.
And it was the first time after having grown up in D.C., lived in D.C. The first time, it wasn't until I saw Lorenzo's Oil that I thought to myself, my God, Dulles Airport looks like an opera house.
That's cool.
Eero Saarinen,
Eero
the
Saarinen, okay.
Finnish
Yeah.
architect who designed the Gateway Arch and who designed the TWA, the famous TWA flight center at JFK, the really cool. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Did he design the Opera House?
Maybe he didn't.
Maybe not.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking of
but
something.
he has designed opera houses.
The
As you do.
coup de grace for me with this movie, the thing that maybe blew me away the most, just because I went, how is it possible that this movie is nearly 30 years old and every film of its ilk has not instituted this choice, has not followed this example? When this movie gets to its end, sort of title cards explaining what happened after the film ended,
Sure.
it starts with the preface, this film was completed in 1992.
Right.
In December of 1992.
Yeah.
As of the time of its release. It contextualizes.
I get you. Yeah. It's not It's not like Lorenzo is still alive and doing great things. Like it's very specifically like, here's the update, folks.
Yeah, and it also makes you aware. I mean, you've been aware that you're watching a movie because it's such a self-conscious
Yeah,
made film.
right.
But it is, it's kind of like, we're in the theater. This is the movie.
Right.
This is when we finished it. Here's what's going on
The movie's
now.
just this story. This is our understanding. I mean, it's placing you in. There's so many fact-based movies where I think even if the craft is incredibly strong, they can become invalidated over time because our understanding of the actual events changes so radically that it's hard to divorce the film from that. And the movie is very smartly like setting up a frame around itself, saying like, this is the film made at the time that we made it with our understanding and what results we had seen.
As of the making of this film, we call them computers.
Right. Lorenzo lived to 30, which was like an additional 20 years past his life expectancy. The father outlived him, the mother
He
died.
outlived mom.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is also, I mean, there's also like, that's obviously as a child, you're supposed to outlive your mom.
Yeah.
But like
she died relatively young. She was 61.
She died relatively young, but also like he was so dependent on these people that like the fact that he lost his mom while he was still alive. Can you just imagine how hard that must have been?
It's very, very It's very difficult to reckon with.
Yeah, and then I remember their not mom's obituary, but I remember reading Lorenzo's obituary and then Augusto's obituary. Which was not long after Lorenzo's died. Right?
Yeah, Lorenzo died in 2008, and Augusto died in 2013.
Right.
He moved back to Italy.
I mean, it's just kind of like he was basically there to just make sure Lorenzo was okay for as long as he could be.
Let's on that note, let's play the box office game. Okay. So this film opened limited, basically New Year's, 1992. So it's not in the top 5.
And it did like one black hat.
It totaled $7 million.
Yeah, so it's about a black hat.
It black hatted it.
It did a black hat.
It was but it cost a lot less than a black hat.
That's true. It cost about like 1/4 black
but
hats.
But it still cost $30 million. Yeah, which is a sizable enough budget that it was viewed as that is unequivocally a flop.
Didn't do well.
Yeah.
Number 1 at the box office in its 8th week. A huge, huge, huge hit. Children's film. I saw it in theaters.
Oh, congratulations.
In 8 weeks, it's made $114 million. It's very well remembered.
Is it a Disney film?
It is.
Is it an animated film?
It is.
Is it Aladdin?
It's Aladdin.
The highest grossing film of its year.
The first film my brother saw in a theater. One of the first films that I consciously remember being like excited to see.
Yeah.
Like I was aware of its release. I remember my dad coming home like with tickets, physical tickets that he'd bought like on the way home.
Yeah.
And we took my brother in 5 minutes, and he put my dad's coat over his head and fell asleep.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a similar memory. I was 3 years old or whatever, but I remember going to the theater to see it. I remember looking at the poster as I walked into the theater, and I remember going, "Oh, Robin Williams is playing the genie."
Really?
Yeah, what a weird fucking
Weird
3-year-old.
little
Oh, they got Robin? That's cool.
Bilge, do you care about Aladdin? Do you like Aladdin?
I like
Any
Aladdin.
memory of Aladdin?
I was in college.
I know.
Yeah. But Aladdin was actually another movie that we reviewed in the
in your arts
in our arts
publication,
possibly in the same issue that my
your Lorenzo's essay.
Possibly, but it was not actually. I didn't write the review. My co-editor wrote the review under a pseudonym.
Oh,
which is weird. I don't remember.
Ladin.
Yeah.
I am not a huge fan.
Oh, that's such a weird
A
opinion.
thing that people will drag me for.
Yeah, you should get dragged for that all the way to the Cave of Wonders.
Here's the most surprising Griffin take of all time.
Right.
I think the 90s Disney Renaissance is overrated.
Now, let me ask you this.
I'm not...
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Have you seen The Thief and the Cobbler?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I remember about Aladdin, I mean, I liked Aladdin when it came out, but I remember at the time of Roger Rabbit, Time or Newsweek or one of these magazines did a feature on Richard Williams.
Yeah,
and I remember a still from The Thief and the Cobbler.
Yeah.
And then when Aladdin came out, I was like, oh, this must be The Thief and the Cobbler because that guy looks exactly like the guy and it wasn't. And there was no Richard Williams mentioned anywhere. And I remember and this was obviously, pre-internet.
Yeah.
For years I was like, did I imagine this other movie called The Thief and the Cobbler?
Yeah.
Like Richard Williams, Roger Rabbit, I had no reference things to look at. I was just like, I must have dreamt this. So I must have dreamt this other movie.
It was
years later. I was like, right. This is a whole thing.
Absolutely corporate espionage.
Yeah.
It is like Ants in a Bug's Life,
all
except
those
he never
Disney,
got to finish his movie.
Is that,
yeah,
but they were also like a lot of
the designs are the same,
and a lot of the animators who worked on
that was the other thing.
I mean, everybody and his mom worked on Thief and the Cobbler because it took so long.
That's the thing.
Some of them moved to Disney.
The
and
Lion
became
King
animated.
was literally like intellectual theft. It was
Right.
them seeing something and being like, let's copy that.
Right.
Aladdin is a little more like that was just, I mean, that movie, Thief and the Cobbler's from like the 60s, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well, he was working on it for 30
Yeah.
years,
Right.
and he was self-financing it, so he would only be able to hire animators to work for like 2 months, and then he'd be like, well,
Yeah.
maybe a year or two from now I'll call you back.
Yeah.
And they started going like, can you draw like the Sultan that you've been drawing for him?
The thing I feel about the Disney Renaissance,
Thief
that
and the
maybe,
Cobbler
maybe you're,
slaps so
sure,
hard.
maybe your problem is the music. I don't know, because to me the thing I like about those is that I think Ashman is just a genius, and that's why I love those 3 movies because of his lyrics. Like that's the thing.
Look, I was the biggest Disney kid.
Sure.
I don't want to, 25 years later, now assume the role of the Gen Xers who were poo-pooing these movies at the time.
Right.
All the songs work. I cannot deny that.
Right,
I am not
right.
the Grinch, okay? I loved these movies. I have great fondness for them. Rewatching them all pretty recently as I
So
have
they're on the Disney
Plus.
Pluses, right.
And even like 8 years ago when they were all on Netflix, I gave them all a run through.
Right.
I just find them so unnuanced in their storytelling and so manipulative.
We should talk about that. somehow.
We'll
I
do
don't know how
Mustard
we would.
Clements at some point.
Walt Disney's blank check.
The thing is,
Yeah.
I don't really like The
eternal.
Lion King. Like that's where they
I
lose
agree
me.
with that.
Is Lion King and on.
You know what
I
my-
do the Ashman movies.
What do you
I
guys
like.
think of like some of the? I mean, like Hunchback. What do you guys think of that?
That's okay.
I
Here's my
love
hot take.
Hunchback.
That's
I
my
love
favorite one.
Hunchback is great.
Yeah, Hunchback's great.
Hunchback is best Disney's Renaissance.
As long as we're not counting Emperor's New Groove.
No,
That's
that for me is
incredible.
post-Renaissance.
That's its own
That's-
thing,
yeah,
right?
But
That's
that's Emperor's New Groove and Lilo and Stitch I like more than any
Sure,
of the
sure,
90s,
sure,
80s
yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
I think of that era, Hunchback's the best one.
Hunchback is
I
great,
think
yeah.
the other ones, the
Hunchback's
songs are undeniable, but I don't love the movies.
Well, the
otherwise.
thing, Hunchback has also, for some reason, the score clicks in that one. Like the songs click in that one better than they do for me. And I don't know, Pocahontas. I'm trying to think of the other like late night Mulan. I don't
Hot
like
take
the music.
Pocahontas is my number 2.
That's
I mean, I was never a huge fan of the
I don't like Pocahontas
songs.
that
I mean, I was
okay.
the Gen Xer who was like, yeah, whatever, the
Right.
Disney songs. That wasn't a thing for me. But rewatching Beauty and the Beast recently for a piece, you know, it
that piece was really good. By the way.
thanks. It really like brought back how good it is.
Beauty and the Beast
Beauty
is
and the Beast is
Insanely
really good.
good.
And the
It's
score,
easily the best one.
quite
Right.
beside this, I mean, the songs are fine again, but the score is great.
The score
too.
is fucking incredible.
That opening with the score. Oh my God.
Yes, the score's incredible. Ashton and Menken are geniuses.
Yes, especially Ash.
They could
yeah. I love
Menken can
I
they
love
could
sometimes
pull off
put
a
it in now.
Chappie in Beauty and the Beast.
100%. It'd be great. I
Yes.
love Chappie and Beauty and the Beast. Put him in right now.
Yeah. There's just
I wish we could figure out a
Mustard
way.
and Clemens. We figured
They
this out.
but they did Aladdin though.
That covers enough of it. Yeah.
But they didn't they
They do
not
Great
do
Mouse
Aladdin?
Detective, Little Mermaid,
Right.
Aladdin.
They do Aladdin. I can't remember how
Hercules,
it trades off.
Treasure
right.
Planet. It's perfect.
Yeah, right.
It's
I'd
the
love to do
entire
that.
rise and fall. It starts pre-Renaissance,
Right, 'cause
ends post-Renaissance.
Beauty
And
and,
Moana.
Beauty and the Beast are the ones who never really did another big
it's
movie again.
Minkoff. No, Minkoff is Lion King.
I
No.
just interviewed these guys.
No, Lion King
Black-
isn't-
Black-
Is Beauty and the Beast Trousdale and Wise?
Yes.
Or is-
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
it's those two.
Yeah,
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And then Minkoff is
Minkoff is the Lion King guy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway,
We'll do
obviously
Mustard
our
Clemens.
whole director thing doesn't work quite as well with the Disney animated movies because they were.
You'd have to
it's
do like
different
a
thing.
Katzenberg.
We're gonna
you
do
know,
Mustard and
pod.
Clements because they
Katzenberg.
I'm all
present
for
a
it.
nice
I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's a
microcosm.
good
I'm
idea.
calling it right now. We'll do Mustard and Clements, April
Shh,
2027.
great. No, we'll do it earlier than that. All right, number 2.
Yeah.
Good movie. Just like a real fucking movie that you watch on cable all the time, and like,
Old Dogs?
I wonder what you think of this movie. I genuinely have no idea. It's like a really solid Hollywood movie with big movie stars, written by a big shot screenwriter.
Big Shot director or is the screenwriter the
He's a
main
big
attraction?
director at the time. He's become a bit of a laughingstock. But
Is
like,
it a Reiner?
Yeah, I was.
Is
gonna
it A
say,
Few Good Men?
I was
Yeah.
going to ask, is it A Few Good Men?
Yeah, yeah.
I was at first I thought maybe Sneakers, but no.
Well, Sneakers is a 92.
but Sneakers
that's
had
number
two
16 at
screenwriters,
the
right?
box
Because it
office.
was Walter Parks and his writing partner.
Really?
Yeah, I think-
okay,
I think,
right. I mean, I know it was directed by Phil Alden Robinson. I don't remember.
But I mean, if it were Sneakers, David's hint would have been what movie fully thrusts his consciousness into you? Because by the way, I'm no longer saying that things fuck.
Right, you're using
In honor
the
of Emperor
Palpatine.
Palpatine,
Yeah,
I'm now
right.
saying that things thrust their consciousness upon you.
What do you think of A Few Good Men? I genuinely wonder.
I really like A Few Good Men. I did not
so
love
much
A Few
fun.
Good Men at the time.
Yeah.
A few years ago I had to do a Tom Cruise ranking for
Hey.
for
Sometimes
Rolling
they
Stone.
just need some grist for the middle, you know?
And it was great. And no, it was great because I had like 6-7 months to do this piece, possibly even longer. And I just rewatched every time, even the ones I'd seen a bunch of times. I just rewatched everything
Right.
in
Gentleman
order.
Tom.
And I just
In order is fun.
I really just got this like renewed appreciation for Tom Cruise
mean, he is-
and the
he's
choices he
a
made.
very impressive
And
performer,
A Few Good Men, right? It was in there. I was like, why don't they fucking make movies like this anymore?
That is-
It's
now
just
when you watch it,
please,
right.
somebody fucking make movies.
Practically avant-garde.
But Reiner, though, I mean, you guys have never
His
done
run,
that.
up
Th-
until
that
a
is-
point
that is
is
one of the greatest
incredible.
runs ever.
It's absolutely bulletproof.
Right. I mean,
until
except
it's
for
not.
except for North, but then he comes
Right.
back briefly.
But look here, North is the exact kind of bad movie I want to
Yeah,
cover on
North's
this
at
podcast.
least interesting.
North,
Right.
I'm all in on. It's everything after American President
Right.
doesn't exist, and there are 8 of them.
Yeah,
that's
There's
our
even
problem.
more. There's so many.
There's one written by his son. There are like 3 Woody Harrelson political dramas.
Ghosts of Mississippi is okay.
That one's
Is
all
it-
right.
right?
Ghost of Mississippi
Sure.
is the one right after American President.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then,
okay.
And
That's
then there's
98?
the 96. And then there's Story of Us, and that's sort of when he just,
Right.
I don't know,
If
starts
his
to make
career
very
ended at
anonymous
Story of
films.
Us, we would do it no
Yeah.
question.
Right.
Everything in the 21st century, we don't want to
You
talk
have to do that one with like Morgan Freeman on an island.
Yeah,
right?
Magic of Belle Isle. and
Yeah.
he's
Right,
got a-
and like the 4 LBJ biopic type
Right.
movies, right?
He's
Yeah.
got a kid romance called Flipped.
That's
he
right.
took over as the director of Rumor Has It
Yeah, he made
3
The
weeks into
Bucket List.
production. I mean, the bucket list.
Bucket List might be the
The
worst
Bucket
film ever
List.
made.
We just can't
All right.
do it. Yeah.
All right. But anyway, A Few Good Men, huge hit. It's made $77 million in a month. Like it was a big fucking movie.
I mean,
that
this-
people went to see.
This was the run where he couldn't miss, where it's like Spinal Tap,
Yeah.
Princess Bride,
Stand By Me.
Stand By Me. Like the guy just every time hit straight bullseyes.
Number 3 at the box office. It's a kids movie. It's a sequel. It's a colossal hit.
It's a colossal.
It's a bit of a rejection of its fundamental premise.
Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
No, but it's also just a complete repeat of the first movie.
Interesting. I mean, this is
You know what I mean? Like he's
Yes.
not actually title, but I mean you
I
are
mean,
just repeating the movie.
He's not actually Adam's Family Values.
You're talking about one of my favorite phenomenons.
Right.
I mean, I always talk about Big Mama's House 2 and how much it perplexes me.
right.
How you can't replicate the exact same circumstances. Okay, so it rejects the premise, but it has
It doesn't
the same
reject
title.
it at all, though. It's just like when you think about it, you're like, oh, okay.
The title no longer applies, really.
It doesn't fully apply. I mean, they add a subtitle to make it make sense.
So it's not a full beta. You're not saying the rules don't apply. They're partially apply.
I've gotten myself in the weeds here.
You
This
really-
thing made $173 million, and that's probably half of what the original made. The original was such a big hit.
Wow. A big star?
I mean, at the time, I guess so. He's famous for these movies,
He's famous for these movies.
and he made other movies. Like he was
Yeah.
a big star when we were kids. Sure, he would be above a title.
Above
I mean, this is an obvious movie.
Colossal.
Come on, think, how many movies made like $350 million in the early 90s?
Like a family movie that made
family movie.
$350
Come on.
million. It's not Terminator 2 Judgment
No,
Day.
no, family movie. I mean, this movie is about a kid.
This movie's about a kid.
It's a kid star.
Oh, it's Home Alone 2 Lost in New York.
Right. He's not home alone.
No, correct.
I mean, like
Another, I watched both of those on Disney Plus.
he's city alone, I guess.
Well, it's like the title itself,
Yeah.
like
Right.
Home Alone, Lost in New York.
Correct.
It's like,
He's unparented.
New York
Yes.
Alone.
I-
It's called New York Alone.
I had never
That
watched.
sounds like an Ed Burns movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I was gonna say it's like
Hey, I
Tom.
guess
I'm
I'm
pretty
New
sure
York
Tom
alone.
DeSillo made that movie sometime in 1997.
I had never watched 2 in its entirety. Had just seen many parts of it on cable.
Oh, that's the one I've seen 40 times.
Well, that's
for
I've
some
seen
reason. Yeah.
elements of it so many times. I'd never watched it straight through. Those weren't movies I grew up on. My parents were anti-Culkin.
They thought they were very cynical, right?
They thought they were cynical and violent.
Which they are.
But as with my Disney Renaissance flush, Disney Plus reopening a lot of these films that were not very streamable for a while, I was like, I'm going to watch both Home Alones back to back.
Yeah.
And mostly with the test of, I know everyone makes fun of this,
Right.
but how do they fucking justify it happening again? And how do
Leave
they
him in the
fucking
airport.
justify
It's a
that
connecting
title?
flight or
They just
something.
have so many children.
They do have way too many children. They should cull the herd.
It's the one scene I love in Home Alone 2 where they're like meeting with the person and they start to realize like, wait, is this a pattern?
Right. It's funny.
The detective is like,
She's
this has
very
happened
funny.
multiple times. Catherine Harrow.
She's great. All right. Number
Not a good
4
movie.
is
Not a good
another
movie.
huge hit of
Not a good
1992. A fucking phenomenon. Not a good movie in my opinion,
Not a good movie.
but a huge hit. Like a music drama,
It's a music drama.
I guess.
It's The Bodyguard?
The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
How do you describe The Bodyguard?
Yeah, it's a music drama.
It's like a romantic drama.
Romantic drama.
Right.
Romantic action movie.
It's not a good movie.
It's not. But are we allowed to say that? I feel like people love that movie now.
Do they?
I don't know.
Do they just love Whitney? Like, is it just the sort of Whitney
song.
power?
Maybe. I don't know.
Mick Jackson film.
Yeah.
You know, not like a...
But a project that was passed around.
100%. And was one of those, like, they
Yeah.
put 1 million people into both roles.
Yeah, and
right.
like I think the reason he has the haircut is because it was originally supposed to be Steve McQueen, but somehow his hair stayed.
Yeah.
Right, because they would just keep pasting people's faces
It's like
onto it.
Alien 3. They're all bald because originally they were supposed to be monks or something like
Right,
that.
yes,
Right,
right. Yeah, I don't like The Bodyguard that much.
Yeah.
I remember I've seen it like once. It's very long.
There rarely, and I guess
It's
this
sort of
has
like
to
a
do.
turgid, you
This
know.
has to do with it being Christmas time. But rarely do we get a top 5 that is just such a perfect snapshot of
This is the year, sure.
Yeah.
All right, number 5. Yeah, boy, what
Is
to
this
say?
going to break the pattern I just?
No,
called
no,
out?
I
Okay.
don't think so. It's a bad movie.
It's bad. No good, very bad. Don't do it.
So I feel like sort of a mocked movie at the time. A star we've discussed that Miller works with a lot.
Oh.
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson.
It's 1992, and the movie is mocked.
I feel like
It's
this was
bullied.
people made fun of this movie. It's a
Did this-
period piece.
Oh, it's Hamlet.
It's not him. I think it's the screenwriting debut of a big name.
Huh.
Like he goes on to be
So it's not Maverick, written
it's
by
not
William
Maverick.
Goldman.
It's not Maverick,
Yeah.
which is a perfectly fun movie.
1992.
No, it's not his screenwriting debut. He'd already written a movie or two. Jesus. Fuck. I don't fucking know.
It's Gibson.
It has like a weird sort of sci-fi twist.
Oh, is it Forever Young?
Forever Young.
Written by J.J. Abrams. Yeah.
I remember seeing that in theaters.
I've never seen Forever Young. How is it?
I remember not liking it very much. Another very romantic movie.
Young. Right.
Another very
Hollywood
romantic.
used to make those with grown-ups. Now it only makes them with like young people. I feel
Yeah.
like more makes the sort of like
Yeah, I mean, I think it barely makes them even with young.
right,
people.
even with young
Yeah,
people.
it's
But like
romance is,
when you think of the Far and Aways, right?
Right, yeah.
like just like a
Right.
quote unquote chick flick.
That stuff only exists years-long serialized television.
You sure?
Like Outlander single-handedly has to carry the weight of all adult romance films that used to exist.
It is one of those genres that I often looked on with suspicion when those movies were coming out, and now I would really just love.
You would like just give me 3 of those a year, right?
Seriously,
Yeah, I
just
know.
please bring back.
Nights in Rodin.
Bring back the mid-range.
Oh, yeah.
Diane
Anything
Lane's
mid-range.
whole Touchstone run.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about this when
Martha,
we did.
bring back Martha.
We were talking about this when we did the Manchurian Candidate remake for Demi, where there was like so much cynicism to like, why won't Hollywood stop remaking these classics?
Oh, by the way, an interesting thing about the Manchurian Candidate remake.
Yeah.
I was listening to your podcast about it. I don't know if I don't
Humble
think you guys,
brag.
but like the fact that it came right after
Stepford Wives.
Well, no.
Oh, and Truth About Charlie.
Truth About
Yeah,
Charlie.
sure.
The thing about Truth About Charlie was I didn't listen to that episode, so it's possible you discussed this. But
You would enjoy that.
it was originally supposed to be Will Smith.
yes,
right.
We talked about
But
that.
that was a friend of mine was an assistant to Jonathan Demme, and I remember she said Jonathan Demme's project is to try and remake these classic Hollywood movies with black leads.
Sure.
Like he wanted to
Right.
do that.
That was his original.
Yeah.
That
So-
makes
so-
much
so-
more sense as an impetus
Yeah.
for those two movies.
Yes.
And then it's
Yeah.
so funny that Wahlberg is the one.
I know, it's just
not
like-
even like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But it
Yes.
is. But in the case of
Manchurian Candidate, it's
it was
Denzel
very much
and Kimberly
yeah,
Elise.
I think it was very much like he didn't get to do that with Truth About Charlie, so
Right.
he's
Sure.
trying again.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense. It's fascinating. Here's some other movies that were in the top 10. Hoffa, which
Yeah.
we were just talking about, a Danny DeVito miniseries.
Little series for a little minute.
The Distinguished Gentleman, that's an Eddie Murphy Goes to Congress comedy,
That
correct?
was one
Yes.
of those I feel like that was such a video store movie. That VHS cover so burned my brain where he is lifting,
he's
the,
lifting
top
the
off
top
of
of the-
Capitol Hill
Yeah,
and he's like
of the
pulling
Capitol.
money out of it.
Yeah. I mean, pretty funny.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Distinguished Gentleman?
I have not seen The Distinguished Gentleman.
I've never even
movie-
come close to watching that
No,
movie.
a movie I saw in theaters at this time that scared the shit out of me, Muppet Christmas Carol. Incredible film.
Masterpiece.
and Toys, one of the greatest blank checks of all. Barry Levinson's Toys.
I like Toys.
Oh, Toys
too.
is likable.
Toys
I do too.
is, I mean,
Talk about a weird movie.
yeah, and but also,
A huge bomb. I mean, like,
Huge
cannot
bomb.
be overstated how badly that film. Do you know what Toys?
a huge bomb that everybody thought was going to be a huge hit
Humongous.
because those trailers, people loved the trailers.
Yeah.
People loved the trailers. It just seemed like it had everything going for it. They were talking about how like Doctor Strangelove was one of their models. It just seemed like
There was like a Sega Genesis game.
Yeah, this movie was going to be like, this was going to like sweep the Oscars or something.
Right.
Like everybody thought this was going to be a huge hit, and it
The
comes out and it
entire-
just like
People were
died.
disgusted.
Yeah.
People were like, "What the fuck is
They
this?"
were angry.
Like,
They
yeah.
were furious. And
Anytime you got your Robin, you lean too much into the child at heart thing. Sometimes I feel like it's sort of like Chappie. People are just like revolted.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chappie,
Chappie though would fit in fine in Toys.
100%.
He'd waltz right in.
I mean, it is.
and also Robin Williams would do great in Chappie.
100%.
Yeah.
Great
What
ass
were you gonna
Chappie.
say? Sorry.
No, I was, I mean,
But I mean, like, when you
Toys
think
is a
of
great example of
Levinson-
tonal control.
Oh,
Like
yes.
Diner,
Yes.
The Natural, Young Sherlock Holmes, Tin Man, Good Morning Vietnam, Rain Man, Avalon, Bugsy. It's like, this guy can do no wrong. And he's like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and I remember at the time I was
Just you wait.
at the time I was really down on Levinson because I hated Bugsy. I
Right.
thought
And
Bugsy was
Bugsy, it does have that kind of like sort of glossy, big,
glossy,
biopic-y,
big, but also
you know.
like it's trying to be a Godfather, but it's
yeah.
not the Godfather.
It's not that good.
and it was also nominated for all these Oscars.
It got a zillion Oscar nominations. It's still Keitel's only nomination, I
Yeah.
believe, which one of the strangest things ever.
I was watching like the Siskel
didn't win
and
a single
Ebert-
one, but I remember
Yes,
we
it
were
didn't win a
so
single
happy when Silence of the Lambs swept that
Yeah.
Oscars
Yeah,
because
yeah.
people really thought Bugsy was going to win.
That's
and
the thing. I
dreading
was
it.
watching the Siskel and Ebert special from that year, and they were like, "Well, obviously Bugsy's the front runner. Like that's the behemoth."
11 Oscar nominations, right?
I think,
It actually
it got-
did. It won for production design and costumes.
right.
But I got 2 separate supporting actor nominations.
10 nominations. Yeah,
insane.
Keitel and Kingsley both nominated.
Yeah.
Obviously, Beatty. Director, Toback for writing it.
Do you think
Cinematography,
that it's-
Ennio Morricone's score. I mean, he really
Great
did.
score.
Yeah, he
Great
did
score.
get everyone on board.
He should have won for score. Of course, Morricone never won anything back then because the Disney movies kept winning them.
Yeah,
probably,
Beauty and the Beast. Well,
Yeah.
a
Good
score
score,
you
yeah.
just praised to the high
good
heavens
score.
was the
a
winner.
good score.
Right, yeah.
And admittedly, Bugsy, terrible movie, but
Right.
great score.
Do you think Bugsy is the most Tobacian of all of Levinson's films?
Oh my God.
All right.
Levinson falls into that exact Rob Reiner category. It's what you're saying. Like the thing you just outlined is an amazing blank check arc, and then there are 10 movies after that that just our ratings would crater.
Right.
The Humbling.
Yeah.
Interesting movie.
Humbling is an interesting movie.
But I mean, how many professional critics at gunpoint would remember that in the last 5 years there was a Barry Levinson, Greta Gerwig, Al Pacino romantic
I just
dramedy?
watched it like 6 months ago.
You're the
Are
one.
you doing a Pacino or Gerwig ranking or something?
No, but I did rewatch it because I was
Wow.
not rewatch it, watch it because I was just like, what the hell is this? I didn't know about this movie. I saw the DVD and I was like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is
That's the
this?
thing. It's like, how does this exist and no one's ever discussed it? One crazy final thing about Toys. Toys was the root of Robin Williams suing Disney because he felt
Because he
like
thought Aladdin was taking box office space from Toys.
yeah. And he
Which,
was like, "Toys is my precious
It's
jewel.
kind
It's
of
my
like,
gem."
yeah, when people are like, "Well, this candidate's taking votes from," I don't know if Toys is taking Aladdin's
Toys
money,
was
Robin.
Yes.
the Bloomberg of its time.
Well, and it was also that thing that like when Lorenzo's oil flopped, it pledged all of its delegates to Aladdin.
That's true. That's
So
true.
don't-
And that is true.
Don't blame Aladdin
It
for
pledged all its
Toys.
oil to Aladdin. Because that lamp's empty now. Genie
Yes.
not in it
Yeah,
anymore.
they had to put a little oil in that lamp.
Yeah.
Bilge, thank you very much for being on this
Thank
very
you so
stupid
much.
show.
Oh, it's a great show, and what a wonderful episode.
I'm just kidding. It's always a pleasure when you're on the show.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
is.
This was fun.
Yes, it was fun.
And now
And I'm glad we got to engage with this movie. And
Me
you
too.
know, right?
I mean, this is how many podcasts ever have any
Exactly.
reason to
Who
do
the fuck ever talks about Lorenzo's oil?
2+ hour Lorenzo's oil episode? Bilge, people should read everything you're writing on Vulture because you're one of the best people in the biz.
Thank you.
I don't know if I should.
What
promote
was I
you.
supposed to
You're
say
an
something?
incredible critic.
You're an incredible critic,
And
amazing writer.
interviewer, and- yeah.
I don't know. You want to plug Twitter?
Oh God.
I hesitate to
it's
even.
my name on Twitter.
got
But
any-
yeah, honestly,
maybe
watch
just
Lorenzo's
log
oil.
off.
Yeah,
Watch
that's what you want to
Lorenzo's
plug.
oil.
Plug that oil.
Blu-ray coming soon from Kino Lore. We're
That's right.
hopefully
I
out by the
looked it up.
time
It
this
just
comes
got
out.
announced.
Hey, baby. And thank you all for listening. And please remember to rate, review, subscribe. Thanks to Andrew Guda for our social media. Lane Montgomery for our theme song. Joe Bonham, Pat Rounds for our artwork. Go to blankies.reddit.com for some real nerdy shit. Go to patreon.com/blankcheck for special features, our second bonus feed. And as always, Chappie thrusts his consciousness into all of us.